All right, good evening, folks. On this May the 1st, May Day, we have a special presentation of Live with Jimmy from Brooklyn. There have been communist meetings, communist demonstrations all over the country today. Some people claiming anywhere from 500 to 1,000 demonstrations have taken place today. But before we get into that, we're going to let Grok give you a little bit of the backstory before Jimmy takes on the subject for the next 2 hours. So, Grok, read that to me, would you please?
Here's the ready-to-read script. Today, on May 1st, thousands of demonstrators are out in cities across America under the banner Workers Over Billionaires. The organizers are calling for a nationwide economic blackout, telling people not to go to work, not to go to school, and not to go shopping. While some mainstream unions are involved, the real driving force behind many of these actions are hardcore communist and revolutionary socialist groups. The main players include the Communist Party USA, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, Freedom Road Socialist Organization, the Revolutionary Communists of America, and the Workers' World Party. These aren't moderate left-wing groups. These are organizations that openly call for the overthrow of the American capitalist system and the creation of a socialist or communist state. Many of these groups have been linked to Neville Singham, a wealthy Marxist activist with deep ties to Chinese Communist Party-aligned networks. His money flows through organizations like the People's Forum and Answer Coalition to fund protests across the country. They're also using classic communist imagery, red flags, clenched fists, and even the old Soviet slogan, "We will smash them with our clenched fist." That quote comes from Dmitry Manowilsky, a top Soviet communist in the 1930s, who taught that communists should talk peace and friendship until the West lowers its guard, then destroy it. This is not just a labor protest. This is a coordinated day of action, organized in part by people who proudly call themselves communists, operating openly on American soil. Want me to tweak anything before you use it?
Now, Jimmy, tell us all about it, buddy. You know everything when it comes to this stuff. Fill us in on what's going on beyond what we've already seen today with the protests.
Well, it's a world communist movement. I read here during one of my presentations here on this channel, I read straight from the Communist Party, how they all working together worldwide. They coordinate, they organize, they train, they all support each other. They work among, I read in the past on this channel, one of my presentations in America, they work in 20 identified groups, like Puerto Ricans, blacks, Mexican Americans, all the different unions are in all the religions. It's a major, major operation. It's not a secret. It's all out in the open. The only reason it seems like a secret is the American media ignores it. The conservative media celebrities ignore it. They deny it. Now, I also explained how the communists get strong by doing fake collapses. They do fake splits. The Russia-China split was fake. That's officially ended 1986 under Gorbachev. But as the communists are building and growing like this, the communists work obviously on the left, but the communists secretly work on the conservative so-called right-wing side to discredit it. Now, in the communist press years ago, when Bill Clinton was running for his second term, the American branch of the World Communist Movement, in their publication, they said this is the most important election ever. We have to do all we can to get Bill Clinton reelected. They said we have the ability to move tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of voters. So the American Communist Party, in their own publication, said they got to get Bill Clinton reelected. And the Communist Right and other publications, that everything and anything they do that tears down the Western capitalist society is moral and just. So the communists work, they build drug cartels, they push ways to destroy the youth. We'll get into that a little bit later. But discrediting the conservative side. So the communists are openly pushing for Marxism, socialism, and communism. They have front groups that don't look as threatening. In other words, they build a mass movement several layers deep, but they also work to discredit the right wing. Now, for 40 years, 4 decades, I've been explaining this, how if somebody's going to pickpocket you and they want to take the wallet out of your left rear pocket, the accomplice to the pickpocket will bump into your right side. So as somebody bumps on your right side, you immediately look to the right to see what it is. You're not noticing your left hand rear pocket is being picked. So a pickpocket, a common street criminal, they know this. They even trained, there's even courses you could take to learn this among crime groups. I guess if you're in prison, you learn it from other convicts. The idea is to always create a diversion, an illusion. So somebody bumps your right, it distracts you from the threat from the left. So now what you just heard there, what I've been doing for 42 years on the radio with Bill Jasper, Trevor Loudon, Jeff Nyquist, and all of us have been doing is trying to explain, expose, and oppose the communist movement. So when the communist press said they have to get Bill Clinton reelected, what major event happened that helped sway some of the vote that was instrumental in getting Bill Clinton reelected? The Oklahoma City bombing. In fact, after the Oklahoma City bombing was done by a guy that had been a patriotic American, after the bombing, Bill Clinton said the Oklahoma bombing helped him get reelected. Now, here's what's interesting. Dennis Mahan was a known Marxist. He was the head of a place called Elohim City. So the bombers who bombed Oklahoma City worked at, trained at, planned with, coordinated, whatever, at Elohim City. And Elohim City, the leader of it, was a known Marxist named Dennis Mahan. Maybe this is all a coincidence, but what happened here is, now at the time when Bill Clinton was president, Bill Clinton had a guy named Anthony Lake being his national security advisor. So to Bill Clinton, that was the highest guy on the totem pole of national security. Anthony Lake was from the KGB front group Institute for Policy Studies. Now, I'm throwing out facts. You could make your own conclusion on this, but sometimes common sense, you're overwhelmed by the facts. So then the facts lead to an opinion, which is more than common sense. You have documentation. So in the communist right, they have to do all we can to get Bill Clinton reelected. Other places, they've been saying we have the ability to move tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of voters. Then Oklahoma City was blown up. It killed all those children, all those innocent people. The FBI had an office there, which I think was the main target of this terror operation. So Dennis Mahan, a known Marxist, there's pictures of Dennis Mahan posing with East German communist guards by the Berlin Wall, I guess it was. Now, this has been thoroughly investigated by Bill Jasper and others, but this type of investigation doesn't come out in the media because there has to be a cover-up when these kind of things happen, because it's probably enemy agents, conspirators, but it's the stupidity, the ignorance, and the lackadaisical approach that U.S. internal security has. This is very, very important to know. Now, if McVeigh and Nichols didn't get caught, that would have been a failed operation. So to Nichols and McVeigh, the actual bombers, they did it because they were mad about the FBI attacking, I forget that, Ruby Ridge, I guess it was. But they blew up a building full of a whole bunch of innocent people. You don't do that. So McVeigh's goal was to blow it up to get even with the FBI. So that was McVeigh's goal. But the communists behind it were doing it to discredit the right wing, to create a right-wing threat so you don't see the threat from the left. Now, in that case, that was so-called a right-wing guy. He was really threatening. but the enemy will build a fake right-wing threat or find right-wing people and push them over the edge or help them do something crazy. Because the goal was to get Bill Clinton reelected. So the end result is the communists helped helped the bombers blow up Oklahoma City. The media blamed that on conservative talk radio, Rush Limbaugh, and the right wing in America. They made the right wing threat really look threatening. And all the time that type of stuff is going on, the real threat is from the left. So there's a guy that works with Putin named Alexander Dugin. Dugin is like the Nazi partner, just like in World War II when the Nazis and Soviets were partners. Alexander Dugin, one of Putin's right-hand men. Alexander Dugin works with and has people working with people in America like the Ku Klux Klan, the neo-Nazi groups. They work with groups that would do terror, maybe like in New Zealand against a mosque or something like that. The communists don't want to be exposed as a threat. That's why the communists in their writing always push peace, and the communists always work for peace. But to a communist, you only get peace when the communist forces are victorious. So that was one instance where the communists discredited the right wing. And now we find out about the Southern Poverty Law Center paying Nazis and fascist and Ku Klux Klan people and helping them, paying them. Now, the way the media is reporting it, they don't really understand it. Even the conservative media, as far as I know, don't understand it. They think the Southern Poverty Law Center was helping the Nazis, the fascists, the Ku Klux Klan, because then the Southern Poverty Law Center could raise money on that. They do fundraising on that. So that's true. They make money on it. But it's also creating the illusion of a right-wing threat. So the communist work, they make money on it, but the main goal is to always have the constant awareness or illusion of a right-wing threat. It's to divert the exposure of the threat from the left. The right-wing threat, whether it's neo-Nazis, whether it's the Ku Klux Klan, they do not have nuclear missiles. They do not have submarines. They're not in every city. They're not in every state. They're not in every country around the world. The communists are. But the communists keep pushing and building the right-wing threat, magnifying it, multiplying it, aiding it, and now you see even funding it. So the Southern Poverty Law Center got caught now, and the conservatives don't understand what this does. What this does, the exposure now, the revelations of the Southern Poverty Law Center's criminal acts here, that proves that Jimmy from Brooklyn was right, Trevor Loudon, all the others who've been warning about this, we were right. J. Edgar Hoover warned about this stuff, Senator Joe McCarthy warned about this stuff, and meanwhile the media in America, including lately, even the conservative media, is denouncing J. Edgar Hoover and Senator Joe McCarthy. So they make it like there's no threat on the left, all the threat is on the right. Now that's the Southern Poverty Law Center. But there's a group called the Anti-Defamation League, which was set up to defend and protect Jewish people from anti-Semitism. But in the past, there was a woman, a Jewish woman from New York, who supported Hitler. She was a communist. She supported Hitler when Hitler and Stalin were partners. This woman then was promoting war, to go to war. She had to stop Hitler once Hitler invaded the Soviet Union. So this woman from New York, Bella Abzug, became a congresswoman in New York. Now, when she died in New York, she was honored all over the city by various liberal groups, including synagogues and Jewish organizations. So I called up the Anti-Defamation League, which is supposed to defend Jewish people from anti-Semitism. And I told Gail Gantz, who is, I believe, the head of fact-finding and record-keeping of the ADL, Anti-Defamation League, and I advised her, I said, please, you have to stop these Jewish groups from honoring Bella Abzug, because Bella Abzug supported Hitler until Hitler invaded the Soviet Union. Gail Gantz from the ADL said, we're willing to give her slack on that because she was good on women's issues. So these groups that are set up supposedly to stop racism and fascism, it turns out that's what they're set up to do, but the real goal is to promote communism. Southern Poverty Law Center. Make the threat from the right, you don't see a threat from the left. Now that also mysteriously, coincidentally, works with the Anti-Defamation League. They're willing to give a woman slack on her supporting Hitler because she was good on women's issues. In other words, the bigger goal there was supporting the left. And then you have the NAACP, excuse me, which was set up to defend and protect blacks and help push and promote and organize blacks and others for all blacks, all African Americans, Negroes, whatever you want to call them these days, for them to have equal rights. Now, all of these things were set up on the surface for valid, necessary points, necessary movement. But the NAACP is radical left. So the socialists set up a group to help blacks, but it's a group set up to bring blacks into the broader socialist Marxist movement. The Anti-Defamation League was to protect Jews, but that also is radical left, the same way Southern Poverty Law Center. So if you see how this works, this is how the communists gain mass influence throughout our society. Under the guise of stopping or defeating fascism, the communists took over Cuba. So Cuba had a fascist, alleged right-wing dictator. So the communists defeat him as a fascist, but that brought communism. The communists did this in Nicaragua. They went after the so-called fascist dictator in Nicaragua. Now we have a communist dictatorship. This is how the communists work. It's the same thing all the time. The communists work against racism. So in South Africa, the communists took over South Africa, which had a lot of minerals we need. The communists took over South Africa under the guise of fighting racism, i.e. apartheid. This is how the communists work. It doesn't change. They build an illusion of a right-wing threat. So then the communist press constantly calls the Republicans fascist, fascist, fascist. And now the Democrat Party is calling the Republicans fascist, fascist, fascist. This goes back to another presentation I did in this channel where I explained Lenin's theory, Lenin's writing on a party of a new type. The Communist Party, which is in every country, is a party of a new type. Each member of the Communist Party is supposed to go out, penetrate other groups, influence other groups, start new groups, and build mass movements. They write. They want to change mass thought patterns. They write about the radicalization process. They write that yesterday's left is today's center. Today's left will be tomorrow's center. So you see, President John Kennedy, JFK, famous Democrat president, JFK, who was murdered by a communist, JFK could not be a Democrat Party member today. So the Democrat Party is totally left. Now, the way the communists work, you see the Democrat Party doing it now. That's because the Communist Party penetrated, has virtual control of the Democrat Party, So just as the communists called everybody in their way fascist, the Democrat Party is calling any opposition to it fascist. The Democrat Party is calling MAGA fascist. This is how the communists work. And now the communists are openly in the street, maybe 1,000 protests across America. You heard earlier when Lee put me on here, you heard the Grok there, and they explained all these different groups. By the way, Trevor Loudon has documentations on all these groups mentioned, and KeyWiki is the main site to go to for it. KeyWiki, that's Trevor Loudon's website. He's a good friend of Lee. Lee has a lot of good friends here. So this is how the communists work. Now, when the communists did their so-called collapse, 1990-91, let's say in that time, Gorbachev, according to the communists, Gorbachev was taking away the image of the enemy to strengthen the socialist forces in the capitalist countries. So this is what the communists write, and now you see, they took away the image of the enemy, and now that enemy is stronger. and the enemy is socialist. Now the socialists and communists are all over America protesting. They're able to riot in every city. They prove that. And meanwhile, anybody who opposes them is considered to be the enemy. So if you oppose or stand in the way of communism, they call you a fascist. Now, in one of my Soviet publications, the Soviets actually wrote about past collapses they did. They dissolved the American Communist Party twice, but they kept in America, but they kept the Communist Party clubs alive. So they dissolved the parties but kept the Communist Party clubs alive. In the American Communist Party Constitution, the club is the most important part of the Communist Party. So basically, they collapsed the American Communist Party twice, but they really didn't. This is brilliant. So the Soviets do a fake split with China, and now China and Russia are our main enemies, the driving force behind the world communist movement. So everything you hear in the media about defeating communism was wrong. So now the same media who was actually helping the communists, because a lot of people who help the communists don't know it. So whenever you hear a conservative talk about how we defeated communism, how Reagan collapsed the Soviet Union, those conservatives, I hope it's unknowingly, were actually part of the communist movement. The same way some prostitutes really believe their pimp loves them. And there's no way you could talk to the prostitute and hear them talk. I heard people talking to them, trying to pull them out of that lifestyle. Christians going out trying to rescue drug addicts and prostitutes. Sometimes you can't reason with people. Their mind is so warped. So the conservatives who kept saying we defeated communism, that made them part of the communist movement without them even knowing it. So I try to give the benefit of the doubt to people who help communism. The communists call people like that useful idiots. But now with this protest today all across the country, with the threat now, Russia, China, Nicaragua, the communist movement, the socialist movement, the Democrat Party, the conservatives still don't understand the depth of this problem. Now, I explained the strategies of Antonio Gramsci. You have to penetrate all the culture. You have to take control of the minds of the people before the communist revolution, whereas prior to that, a relatively small group of communists do a revolution and take over a country, and then they have to re-educate the masses, because the masses weren't ready for communism. So Gramsci's strategy was to defeat and take over the minds of the masses prior to the communist revolution. And as an overlayer to that is the strategies of Czechoslovakia in 1948. And the communists write about this. They took over Czechoslovakia in 1948. They had a coalition government after World War II, and the communists were in the government, and they ended up with control of the enforcement parts of the government. So communists being in the government, they slowly defeated and threw out the anti-communist, and they had organized mass communist protesters in the street. Jesse Jackson refers to that as street heat. So Czechoslovakia had mass groups at the bottom, militant groups in the street. You had communists throughout the government, all the government departments I just mentioned the country, it just slipped my mind. All the countries there, all the departments of the government were weaponized. And they defeated and took over the country relatively peacefully. So that is going on in this country. They're re-educating the population before the revolution. So the communists got control of the means of education, the means of information, and the means of communication. This is how the communists work. And then they get into the electoral arena, and they get their people elected. And now we're at a point where the communists have immense power and influence in America and around the world, but you also have a resurgent military in the Soviet Russia and communist China. So now they're willing to have their clenched fists to crush us. Ukraine kind of was like a monkey wrench thrown into the machinery. The Soviets were held back by Ukraine, and somehow, because of the communist subversion in this country, there's conservative people who don't support Ukraine. This shows you how the communists are able to work on all sides and confuse all sides. So you have people in America who support every part of the communist movement, and yet they support Ukraine, which doesn't make sense. Well, the reason, I guess, that these left-wing Americans, some of them who aren't communists, but other than that, they're supporting all the communist movement. A lot of these left-wingers, Democrats, who claim to support Ukraine, it's probably because Ukraine was outwardly invaded by a foreign country, which most people could see that that's wrong. But also, the president of Ukraine might be more receptive to the gay movement. He might be more receptive to the wild immigration. So the left in this country who aren't communists might embrace Ukraine that way, whereas Putin built a reputation. Putin is against Muslim terror. He's against the transsexual movement. So to some conservatives, Putin looks like a conservative, but they don't understand the reason Putin opposes drugs in his country, the reason Putin is against terrorism in his country and the transgender movement in his country is Putin doesn't want to destroy his country. But Putin would support those operations in the Western world. This all goes back to people not understanding anything about communism. So you have good American people who think Putin is a good guy who could save Europe, and then you have communists who support Ukraine, and this is all opposite. Communists would be supporting Putin. But because the Ukrainian president has an image of being pro-gay and all that liberal type stuff, so you see here how both sides could be totally confused. They could be chaos all over the place, all over the world. When everything is full of chaos and everything's going wrong and crazy, when that's done on purpose, the people behind it, the highly organized, skilled people who create this, they're the ones who ultimately could win. Because even a small group that's tightly organized and coordinated, setting out well-thought plans and strategies, they can't lose if there's nothing countering it. So this is what Lee is letting me do here. Trevor Loudon's doing it. Jeff Nyquist, of course. Bill Jasper. There's a lot of people. We had 100 years of people fighting against communism. But when the communists fake a collapse, at the same time they're building the communist movement within America, now you see the culmination here of 100 years of communist activity. The communists have been working among Muslims for over 100 years. Lenin, before the defeat, before the conquest of Russia by the communists, they were already reaching out to the neighboring Muslim countries and the sections of the Russian Empire that were Muslim. So some people now talk about this new development, the Marxist Islamic unity. No, it's the Soviet hand in the Muslim glove. In fact, Putin, now some people don't understand this, Putin is a communist. You can't be the head of the KGB without being a communist. Just like you can't be the head of the mafia crime family unless you're a criminal. So you start out as a criminal and you work your way up to be the mafia godfather. Well, in a communist country, you start out as a communist, you work your way up to be head of the KGB. You can't be any higher in the communist movement than head of the KGB. So that's Putin. Putin is a communist, and yet some people think he's going to save the Western world or Europe from the radical Islamic onslaught and the transgender movement. This is total, absolute chaos. So in the American Communist Party here, so the Soviet Union supposedly collapsed 91, around that era. So here you have the American Communist Party. This is 1998. This is their publication, The Communist Party USA, Changing, Growing, Swimming in the Mainstream, okay? This is written by Gus Hall, January 17, 1998. Now, the same Gus Hall, head of the American Communist Party, in other publication I read on this channel, Gus Hall wrote, There's no way anyone can unlink the Soviet Union and the socialist countries from the world revolutionary process. So Gus Hall was a leader. The only higher leader than Gus Hall was the leader of the Soviet Union. Gus Hall was a very important communist. The same Gus Hall, again, I want to remind you, John Brennan voted for Gus Hall for president. John Brennan became the head of the CIA. John Brennan was one of the communist conspirators that worked to topple Trump. The communist movement is strong. They are the mainstream. The Democrat Party is the face of the communist movement. So in the beginning of this, when this show came on, Lee played the grok there, explaining all these different communist groups and communist parties. They're all communist parties, but the main one is the American Communist Party. That's always how it works. There are spin-off groups, because you have some people that might prefer the way of, let's say, Stalin. Other communists may prefer the way of Lenin. Others may prefer Gramsci or Trotsky or Mao. So the thing is, you put out like a menu. Like if you go to an Italian restaurant, Chinese restaurant, Mexican restaurant, you have a menu. You have a wide spectrum, and then there's different variations and combinations of each thing on the menu. So in political warfare, you write the menu, but it all comes from the same communist leadership. And in that menu, you could pick what form of Marxism, what form of socialism, what form of communism you prefer. So it puts out a wide spectrum. It's a menu. And then all those different groups, all those subgroups, they get all pulled together into one final movement where they all work and vote through the Democrat Party. Now, the communist plan and the communist right, we have the ability to move tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of voters. They write that organization increases strength tenfold, 100-fold, 1,000-fold. Now, you know the way the communists work. It's common sense. The communists work in every organization. Now, when you get into school and you go through elementary school, middle school, high school, college, university, you get 10 years of indoctrination. Some of the indoctrination is against white people. It's about slavery. It's about the plight of the American Indians. They get you gradually to feel maybe less patriotic. By the time you graduate, at least you're a Marxist. But then when you're out as a Marxist, then you join political groups. That's where the communists get you. But all of this is organized and set out and built by the communist parties. Lenin's party of a new type. It is very important that people know this. So you get out of college, you go to law school, and you come out of law school like a real revolutionary. Then you end up becoming a district attorney, a prosecutor. You become a judge. Eventually, you maybe get on the Supreme Court. So the communists unleashed the power of the Communist Party and the communist movement by doing fake splits and fake collapses, and then creating a diversion. Everybody's looking at the threat from the right. Meanwhile, the communist, it's like unleashing termites in a wooden house. You unleash them in the basement. They go after the wood in the basement. They work their way up the beams, the joist, all the way up through your walls, through the joist, through your ceiling, to your roof. Before you know it, your house is rotted, and you don't see it sometimes because the rot could be inside the wood. You may not see it. You may hear a different creak when you walk on the floor. All of a sudden, your foot goes through the floor. So the communists work in some ways like termites. They start eating you out from the inside. They start eating out, you don't see it, and then all of a sudden everything's collapsing. Does America look like it's collapsing all over the place? It certainly looks like that to me. That's not an accident. And now when the communists could come out in the street and protest all over America, they got the teachers' unions teaching kids. They got kids being organized. The communists, just as the Nazis, the communists and Nazis work on the youth. In America, we worked on the youth to keep America strong. We had the Boy Scouts, we had the Eagle Scouts, we had the Girl Scouts. Where kids go, they meet other kids, they know how to work, how to build a fire, how to camp, maybe how to hunt, how to do good deeds. They do Pledge of Allegiance, they do patriotic things. We get the children early. Most of the time, parents would get the kids going to church. You go to Mass, you go to Catholic school, or you go to the Jewish school. This is to keep our system alive, our political and cultural system. Is to keep it alive. It's self-perpetuating, self-reinforcing, and this is what the communists target under Antonio Gramsci's strategy. They got to break that tie to the past. They got to break the heritage. They got to break our knowledge and our love of our country. They have to subvert you little by little. Perversion and subversion. It's all combined. Because if you think about this, it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. So conversely, what would the communists do? You destroy the youth. So now in America, kids could barely read or write. In the measurement compared to other countries around the world, we're near the bottom as far as the ability to read and write and think clearly. But if you want to have a test around the world on which kids are more trained and experienced in and indoctrinated in all kind of sexual perversion, that'll be the American kids or kids from the Western world. This is how the communists work. So again, when the termites are in your house, you don't notice it until things are in bad shape. And now everything's collapsing. We have communists rioting all across America. When Floyd got killed, they claim it was a spontaneous uprising. But I was reading the communist publications, and the communist publications, they really don't keep secrets, the communists. The only reason it seems to be secret is they're being ignored by the media conservatives. Because a lot of the stuff I get is gettable. It's out there. The communists sell magazines, they sell newspapers, they have books you could buy. Now, some of the stuff I have is secret stuff, not for publication, internal documents. Some of the communist publications I have is intended for the leadership of the communist parties. So the Soviets have publications in every single language. So naturally, in Spanish, that covers most of Latin America, Central, South America. Most of that, except for the countries that speak Portuguese. So the communist publications from the Soviet Union are printed in every single language, and it's sent to every country's communist party. This is how the communist parties coordinate and keep in touch. And they also have meetings in person where people show up. We had one in Cuba recently. You had 30,000 youth that were in the Soviet Union a few years ago. The youth. The communists work and stress the youth. So in a target country like America, they stress to the youth the hatred of American country, the hatred of white people, hatred of capitalism, and they also, at the same time, they're working on the youth of America to convert them to be enemies of America, to convert them to be fighting for communism. At the same time, the communists are doing that, they're inserting drugs and all kind of sexual perversion among the youth. So they're destroying the youth in America. At the same time, they're building the youth to be agents to tear down America. This is how the communists work. It's brilliant. And it looks brilliant because they're successful. But they're only successful because they're brilliant, and the people that they think are their enemy are incredibly stupid. The American people, if the American people knew what I know, what Lee knows, what Jeff Nyquist, Trevor Loudon, Bill Jasper knows, if the American people know what we know, there would not be a big communist threat like there is today. And a big part of this threat is the communists have the ability to create the illusion or magnify a right-wing or racist threat that might really be there on a low level. So now you see the results. You see the results. They got people in government. The communists had a couple of their people elected president. Obama was part of the communist movement. Bill Clinton was part of the communist movement. Hillary Clinton, who's ugly on the outside just as much on the inside. This is evil. It's diabolical. Now, when I read the communist publication several years ago, and they repeatedly remind people how it was the peace movement, which was basically a KGB operation. The peace movement helped end the war in Vietnam. That brought communist victory in Vietnam. So the communists write about how they successfully ended the war in Vietnam through the peace movement. And the communist leaders in Vietnam actually credited the peace movement for the American and South Vietnamese defeat. So the communists work like that. At the same time, they're building a communist movement, they're building a peace movement. In communist publications, writings, the communists say they are not pacifist. So the communists say they are not pacifist, but they're building a peace movement to make us pacifist. So if we're pacifist and the communists are militaristic, we can't win. It's like the communists have us tying our hands behind our backs as they're attacking us. So they build the peace movement at the same time they're attacking us. But that fits the definition, what the communists say, what peace is. Peace is the result you get when all communist forces are victorious. That's why the peace movement during the Vietnam War, they put up the two fingers, the V sign for victory. So the V sign for victory during World War II meant victory against the Nazis. During the Vietnam War, the peace movement went victory for peace, and peace meant communist victory. Now, some of this stuff sounds confusing. It isn't. Like, everything is confusing in the beginning. But at some point, when you learn enough, then you could see it. And when you see it, you know what it means. And hopefully I'm getting people to raise their awareness and understanding of this. So I lecture here the way people used to go out and lecture trying to bring people to Christ. Now, we had in the past the Christian, particularly the Catholic religion, was heavily, strongly anti-communist and anti-socialist. So the communists set out an operation to penetrate the Christian religions. And the religion they most specified and worked on was the Catholic religion. So we had the Catholic Pope, the Polish Pope, who was anti-communist, and then the communists tried to kill him. We had a congressman in Congress, Congressman Larry McDonald. He was an anti-communist, and the communists did kill him. They shot down his plane. Congressman McDonald was also the head of the John Birch Society, which is an anti-globalist, anti-communist group. I'm a little bit in disagreement with them now about Ukraine, but they did good anti-communist. They do anti-communist work, the Birch Society. So the Pope was a threat to the Soviets. They tried to kill him. Congressman McDonald was an anti-communist in the U.S. government, so they killed him. The communist movement destroyed the reputation and hurt the following of people like J. Edgar Hoover and Joe McCarthy. The communist movement then created the illusion of a right-wing threat, and that made people look away from the communist threat. Now you wake up one day and shazam, there's communists in every city, in every state. They got control of the schools, they got control of the unions, and now you could see it. Now, if you're a conservative media celebrity who kept celebrating every day how we defeated communism, you feel like an idiot. And you should, because you were wrong. You had no reason to be this stupid. I was in the media all different days, all different hours, all different times, night, day, midnight, morning, afternoon, all different times, whenever I could squeeze in time. I gave publications. I would go to the two main radio stations in New York, the two big stations, the main ones, talk shows. I will bring bundles of stuff in manila envelopes, most of them original documents. Sometimes I had a photocopy because I couldn't get enough of the original. I was bringing it regularly 2 or 3 times a week to every radio station, maybe 6 bundles to ABC, maybe 4 bundles to WOR. So all the conservative media celebrities got the stuff that I had. They didn't use it. Some of them didn't understand it. Now, Bob Grant loved the stuff I got him. I was his radio station, his show, the Bob Grant Show. That was like my base of operations, basically. Bob Grant liked the stuff I gave him. He let me talk all the time. He told me, you should be heading the CIA. You should run for president. I told Bob Grant, I think I need my high school diploma first. He thought that was funny. I got it to Rush Limbaugh. Now, in some cases, one particular host, everybody knows the name, maybe I won't say it now. One particular host was stealing the stuff, so I would bring it directly to the station. So one day I called up the station, not to get on the radio, but it was the station for the office. And I called up the station, I talked to one of the hosts, Steve Malsberg, who was a really good guy on the radio, good conservative, anti-communist guy. I said, Steve, did you get the stuff I brought you? He said, no. When did you bring it? I said, 2 days ago. He said, no. He said, hold on. He looked in the office all over the place. He found 6 of the manila envelopes that I had stuffed with all kind of papers and stuff for 6 different hosts. All of it was in one desk of one of the hosts. So one of the hosts apparently was stealing the stuff I was bringing to the station. That guy's name was Curtis Sleewer, okay? Curtis Sleewer was the dirtbag that did this. Now, on that station, the station on the air, on the show, asked the audience, do you know anybody that you would advise us to test to be a co-host with Curtis Sleewer? Because Sleewer can't do a show on his own. He always had to have a co-host. So I recommended a good friend of mine, Dorinda. She had worked at a radio station Sunday morning as a substitute host, but it was every Sunday morning. So she was substituting for somebody else, but she was doing it every Sunday. So it was like it was her show, even though the show was Unger and Capillas. So anyway, ABC Radio trusted me at the time. They immediately brought her on the station, and she did a tryout with Curtis Lewer. She was so good that every caller to the show was complimenting her, praising her, and wanted to talk to her. She did so good. Now, the reason I advised her, and not me, I could have said, well, try me out. I didn't do that. I recommended Dorinda, because Dorinda, I thought, would be more successful at it. I may have known more than Dorinda, but she knew a lot. Plus, I would work with Dorinda at the station or off the air on our own time. I would have been able to feed Dorinda information and documentation, but she had a really beautiful voice. She was very funny, very smart. She understood it. She understood Antonio Gramsci and Anatoly Golitsyn. So she had a pretty thorough understanding of communism. Nobody else on talk radio ever had what she had. Beautiful voice, quick-minded, quick-witted, funny, very smart, and I would have been able to help her. I recommended her and not me. She was very successful in that thing, but they never called her back. They stabbed her in the back. Apparently in talk radio, everybody's fighting for position. Everybody's fighting to keep their job. Dorinda would have stolen that show from Curtis. She did not try to steal it. She just did her natural presentation on the radio. Now, if she had gotten that job, we would not be in this mess now. Now, could you imagine Rush Limbaugh? Limbaugh had a good voice on the radio. Limbaugh is very funny. He had a good sense of humor. He was pretty smart. But Limbaugh did not understand at all, or was afraid of, or was stopped about talking about the communist threat. Now, if Limbaugh understood the communist threat like I do, he would have been successful. America would not be in the mess we're in now. Because the battle up until now is a battle of information and knowledge. So the communists have all the knowledge that hurts America. They have all the knowledge and control to shape opinions. There was no counterforce opposing and exposing communism. Dorinda would have been a good one, because she would have stole the show. She would have been a big hit. She could have been as big as Rush Limbaugh. And of course, they didn't do it. She's no more trying. It fizzled out. That was a chance we had, and it was blown. I don't know if the station stabbed her in the back, or was Curtis Sleewer, or all of them. But we had a chance then. Now I don't know what to say, because now it looks like it's very late. The American people listening now, what you're learning here, you got to spread the word. You get it. More people listen to this platform, listen to this station, listen to my interviews or presentations I do here. I'm Jimmy from Brooklyn. I'm also on Dynamic Independence with Lee Anderson, Jeff Nyquist, and Trevor Loudon. I also did 20 or so interviews with J.R. Nyquist. That's JRNYQUIST. JRNyquist.blog. I get 20 interviews with him, about 20. I do the interviews with Johnny Anderson at Dynamic Independence. I do my thing here with Lee here on KLW Live. I've did a lot of phone calls are out on the internet. I did the Bob Grant, Michael Savage. I did a whole lot of things with Mayor Giuliani on the radio. So I'm out there. I've been explaining this. Now, one thing I explained, a lot of these people with what you call Trump derangement syndrome, a lot of these people, I think it's a psychosexual problem they have. I think a lot of these people might have sexual fantasies about Donald Trump. So they have sexual fantasies and desires about Donald Trump, and they can't stand it that they have those fantasies, but they can't get it. They can't get what they want. So it comes out on a hatred of something they want and can't have. So whenever you hear these people, the men among Democrats, the way they're cursing out and denouncing Trump, just think in your mind, they probably have a strong sexual desire for Donald Trump. But also, it's not coming naturally, this so-called Trump derangement syndrome. You notice there was no Trump derangement syndrome until he became president? Before that, the liberals and most people loved him. I didn't know anything about Trump. I thought it was comical. I thought it was silly, the idea of him running for president. And then he comes in, and the communists trying to get him out of power. And the communists working against Trump, there's conservatives working against Trump, and that's scary, because if you're Iranian, if you're one of the Iranian radical leaders, and your hope is for a major anti-Trump movement, that's the only way Iran radicals are going to stay in power. So you know the left is on your side, because the communist radical terror movement, that's all one movement. When you start seeing conservative types denounce Trump, I think that's what the Iranians and the communists are going to hold out for. They want to build that part. Because if you get an organized movement on the conservative side against Trump, look, I don't agree with or like everything Trump does, but if Trump didn't get elected, we would have been defeated. We're still in trouble now, but at least he held back part of it. Now I hope this Iranian thing straightens out, because this is a mess. No matter what, we're in trouble. And most American people cannot conceive of losing. They just can't believe. They think we always win. We never lose. When that COVID virus was unleashed on us by the communists, it changed how we vote. When all of the communists were creating an illusion of a right-wing threat, they send us a virus. They organized. They got control of the schools. They're able to win elections. Now, when COVID hit, remember what people went through? They couldn't get tampons. They couldn't get baby food. They couldn't get toilet paper. You remember the panic? Well, just imagine when there's no food, there's no electricity, there's no running water. If we get into that, we could end up, millions of us dying. We could have ended up being forced into cannibalism. You have to be able to see the depth of the danger we're in. And then you have to know, when you get to the point that you understand and fear the depths of the danger we're in, you have to do something just as strong as your fear. You have to do something strong to stop it. I mean, you sit in a stadium. I love watching baseball. Unfortunately, my team is the New York Mets, who don't win very often. But I let myself relax and enjoy, get my mind off reality and enjoy the game, watch the game. You watch TV, you cheer, you're at the stands, you're cheering with everybody. But the battle we're in now, you don't have to be in the stands cheering. The battle we're in now for survival, You don't just sit back and watch the players. You don't just sit back and watch me, Lee, Trevor, what we're doing. This so-called game or competition, I guess I should call it, the competition now between the free world and the communist world. This is not a spectator sport. You could actually get on the field and participate. So whatever you learn from me, you could go out and spread it. Spread it to your family, spread it to your kids. Write it on the wall, graffiti, in the toilet, wherever you are. You got to help spread this the same way the communists do. You got to speak up. We got to protest. When you see a guy like Kimmel, I thought he was supposed to be a comedian. When Kimmel and the Democrats are applauding the shooting of Trump, when you get a guy on WABC radio line now denouncing Kirk's wife, Erica Kirk, denouncing her. How could you denounce a woman whose husband just got assassinated? And this creep lying now is on a major talk show in New York, WABC Radio, the same station Mark Levin is on. And by the way, I was a little critical of Mark Levin recently because he keeps saying Marxism when he should say communism. I'm kind of softening on that now. It's so important what Mark Levin's doing, especially as a Jewish person. I'm not Jewish, but for the people listening here who are Jewish, let me tell you, we need to see more patriotic Jewish Americans. You can't just have people like Chuck Schumer and Gerald Nadler from New York. You can't have people like this, like Dan Goldman. You can't see congressmen and senators of the Jewish faith or ethnicity working against America. We got 1/3 of the Jewish vote in New York voted for this communist mayor with Muslim terror. Got 1/3 of the Jewish vote. We need to see more patriotic, conservative, or just patriotic Jewish Americans. Now that Israel has a trouble openly with terror, fighting against terrorism, you got this massive anti-Jewish, anti-Israeli sentiment, and now Jewish people come out with the Israeli flag. The people with the Israeli flag, you got to grow that movement. You don't just now wake up to politics because Israel's under attack. You should have been out in the streets supporting Oliver North. You should have been out in the streets supporting America. The Italians in the Bronx, New York, when Antifa was up in Bronx, New York, they wanted to tear down the statue of Christopher Columbus. The neighborhood Italians found out about that. The neighborhood Italians came out with pipes, bats, and they surrounded Antifa. And they had Antifa encircled. So Antifa, who's extremely violent communist, they're out and out communists. They wear the hammer and sickle on their helmets, Antifa. They were going to tear down the statue of Columbus in Bronx, New York. The Italians surrounded Antifa. They were moving in on them, and the Antifa called the police. Antifa called the police begging for help, and the police helped get Antifa out of there so they wouldn't get beaten up. So the Jews who come out with the Israeli flag in support of Israel, the Italians who supported the Columbus statue, you Jewish people, you Jewish Americans, you Italian Americans, you Iranian Americans are out in the street now. We got to get together every time there's a protest or demonstration against the enemy or for America. At these protests, you should see the Ukrainian flag, the Jewish flag, and the Iranian flag, and the Italian flag out in the street. We have to support Israel's freedom. We have to support Ukrainians' freedom. We have to support defending Christopher Columbus statue. We can't just have each group defending their heritage. It's one free world heritage. We have to start learning to defend it. We don't sit in the stands cheering now for this, because this is a battle in the streets. It's a battle of protest. When you have the mayor of New York going to use New York City taxpayer funds to bring crowds out in the street. Let me get to this again. Today's New York Post. the communists started calling our Tea Party stuff AstroTurf, meaning it's fake. It's not like organic. It's not grassroots. It's a movement built with money. So this is a New York Post editorial, taxpayer-funded AstroTurf. This is New York Post, Friday, May 1st. That's today. I'm just going to read you a little bit. What a sick joke. Mayor Mandami is burning city cash to stage angry crowds to demand rent guidelines board, already controlled by his appointees, make good on his rent freeze campaign promise. The mayor boasts of how his Organize NYC, that's a group, Organize NYC, the mayor boasts of how his Organize NYC will pay professional hacks to recruit people to put on this pointless show as the Rent Guidelines Board considers whether to freeze rent regulation rents for 1 million city apartments. He's basically spending public funds to recruit his own Mao. That's in mouse, like Red China. He's basically spending public funds to recruit his own Mao-style Red Guards to bully any dissenters into line. The mayor says it's about encouragement and that he wants landlords there too, but it's all wink, wink, smirk, smirk. Any landlords who dare to show protest that the freeze will push their buildings into bankruptcy will instantly be surrounded by fanatics shouting them down, while Mandami's appointees pretend to be impressed by this show of public opinion. It's the farthest possible thing from an organic engagement of neighborhood residents, a paid political show to misrepresent the mayor's misrule as a matter of public will. Next, the cadres will hit other public meetings to support the Mandami initiative, whether killing gifted and talented programs or closing streets or divesting from Israel. Now, the gifted and talented programs, we have special high schools in New York for students that are gifted. They're smarter for whatever reason. There are certain kids who are just born smart, raised right, whatever reason. There are certain kids, we all knew it in school, we all knew kids guys and girls who were just smart, had a better working brain. Now, if you have a public school where all kids are in one class, it's all uniform, the slower kids will hold back the smarter kids. When a normal society would promote the smarter kids, would give them specialized education. But when you have a classroom where kids are slow and other kids are smart, the classroom will be held back to bring the slow kids up to par with the higher level kids. That stunts the advancement and growth of the smarter kids. So in New York, we have I think about 4 high schools that are for the gifted and talented kids. The communists want to stop that under the guise of stopping racism, because the gifted and talented kids, when I was in school, the classes were mostly Jewish. Today, they're mostly Chinese, or majority Chinese, or mostly Chinese. So when I was a kid, it was mostly Jewish. I was in those classes, by the way. So when you have people like that, who could grow up to be the best leaders, the best scientists, the best doctors, the best, the brightest. They have to be, every student should be pushed to their limit. So one student's limit is higher than somebody else's. But when you put everybody in one uniform class, you're going to dumb down the schools. Now, being that the black and Hispanic kids were a little slower, it might have been more of a cultural thing. I don't think it's genetic. I don't think it has anything to do with race. It's a cultural thing, and some kids may have a heads up, a little brighter advantage. When I grew up on the Lower East Side, everybody was poor. There were no rich kids where I grew up. But we had some kids who were smarter and some kids who were slower. So what the communists did, now this is going to get me in trouble here, the communists did something called race norming. And this is very dangerous, very, very dangerous. Black kids, this is more recently. I don't think they did this when I was a kid. But at least a few years ago, and I think it's still going on, Black kids would get 15 points added to their score. Hispanic kids got 10 points added to their score on tests and grading. That was called race norming, because they wanted the levels for white, black, Hispanic to all be level. So you promote kids who aren't up to par, and it hurts them, it hurts society. So the communists did this under the guise of reversing or countering racism. But the higher level communists know what this does. It's going to cause the breakdown of society. You're going to have incompetent people getting degrees when they don't know enough to have those degrees. And then there'll be a backlash. And then when there's a backlash about it, then you're going to say, see, we told you that's racism. Right now, with these schools, when you dumb down these schools, we're going to eventually end up with less scientists, less competent doctors, less competent professors and scientists. The goal of the enemy is to dumb us down, to weaken us. So they're dumbing us down. They're making our kids embrace socialism and communism. They're making our kids embrace all kind of sexual perversion. They're indulging our kids in drugs, pornography, marijuana, free sex, all of that most destructive stuff. Over decades and decades of that, with no bombs, no bullets, or no missiles, we could be defeated. This is how the communists work. Now, I have here something long. I hope I could read it without too many. Let me see here. What I have here, this is a report put out by Beria. Beria is one of the top Stalin's henchmen, and they lay out plans. So I'm going to read you here. This is Beria on changing and destroying loyalties. So I'm going to just start from the beginning of what I have. In conclusion, we quote from the previously mentioned notorious speech by Levantria Beria, Stalin's evil henchman, before a gathering of American students at the Lenin University in 1953. Degradation and conquest are companions. In order to be conquered, a nation must be degraded. Degradation can be accomplished insidiously and effectively by consistent and continual defamation. Continual and constant degradation of national leaders, national institutions, and national heroes must systematically be carried out by attacking the character and morals of man himself, and by bringing about through contamination of youth a general degraded feeling. Command of a populace is facilitated to a very marked degree. The first thing to be degraded in any nation is the state of man himself. Nations which have a high ethical tone are difficult to conquer. Their loyalties are hard to shake. Their allegiance to their leaders is fanatical, and what they usually call their spiritual integrity cannot be violated by duress. It is not efficient to attack a nation in such a frame of mind. It is the basic purpose of psychopolitics to reduce that state of mind to a point where it can be ordered and enslaved. Thus, the first target of man is himself. He must be degraded from a spiritual being to an animalistic reaction. He must no longer think of himself or his fellows as capable of spiritual endurance or nobility. The attack on the mind of a nation involves changing loyalties. The changing of loyalties consists in its primary step of the eradication of existing loyalties. In rearranging loyalties, we must have a command of their values. There is loyalty to the family unit, his parents and brothers and sisters. This is destroyed by lessening the value of marriage, by making an easiness of divorce, and by raising children wherever possible by the state, by bringing about and supporting propaganda to destroy the home, creating continuous juvenile delinquency, forcing upon the state all manner of practices to divorce the child from its in the end to create the chaos necessary to communism. by making readily available drugs of various kinds, by giving the teenager alcohol, by praising his wildness, by stimulating him with sex literature and advertising to him or her practices as taught as the sex Paul, the psycho-political operator can create the necessary attitude of chaos, idleness, and worthlessness into which then can be cast the solution, which we give the teenager complete freedom everywhere: communism. By this means, the patriotism of youth for their flag can be dulled to a point where they are no longer dangerous as soldiers. While this might require many decades to effect, capitalism's short-term view will never envisage the length across which we can plan. This is now the guy who put this together. He puts his own comment in this here. This is an explicit, authoritative acknowledgement by Beria of the capacity of the anti-state strategist to plan strategy for implementation over prolonged periods of a generation or more, an understanding of which is essential for the analyst of contemporary developments. It goes on, the original statement from Beria here. This misalignment of the loyalty of youth to a capitalist nation sets the proper stage for realignment of their loyalties with communism. The subject of loyalties and their realignment is in fact the subject of non-armed conquest of an enemy. The educational programs of a psychopolitics must, at every hand, seek out the levels of youth who will become the leaders of the country's future and educate them in the belief of an animalistic nature of man. This must become fashionable. They must be taught to frown upon ideas, upon individual endeavor. As it seems in foreign nations that the church is the most ennobling influence, each and every branch and activity of each and every church must, one way or another, be discredited. Religion must become unfashionable by demonstrating broadly through psychopolitical indoctrination that the soul is non-existent. There must be no standing belief in the church, and the power of the church must be denied at every hand. By perverting the institutions of a nation and bringing about a general degradation, a population can be brought psychologically to heal. It's a long and arduous road for the psychopolitical operative to achieve this state of mind and a part of a whole nation. But no more than 20 or 30 years should be necessary in the entire program, having at hand, as we do, the weapons by which to accomplish our goal. So you see the wildness of the youth. Now you see youth showing up at malls, thousands of them, rioting spontaneously. We see what happens when the people go on the spring break in Florida and other places, Mexico. We see the wildness with the sex and drugs. We see the people. Now the only difference here, when Beria did this was against the church. The communists got a little smarter. Why destroy the religion? Get control of the religion at the top, and then you influence all the people following or under the religious leaders. So the communists made a change there. Marx wanted to destroy religion, but if you get control of the religion, so the communists, the Soviets, they publish and republish the Muslim manuals, the Muslim Quran, the Muslim books. The communists teach, they get control of the Muslim leaders for 100 years. Those Muslim leaders then push parts of the Muslim religion that benefits the communist. The idea to kill the infidel, to build a world Muslim movement in order to tear down Western society. So the communist leadership works with the Muslim leadership and the Christian leadership, and that influences the masses of the Christians, the masses of the Muslims. As the communists write, and I presented it here in past presentations on this channel, the whole idea is to change mass thought patterns, mass moods, and mass sentiments. Everything is about mass influence. They stress working among the youth. So in this one speech by Beria, you see it laid out by the enemy. And I have coexisting stuff, reinforcing this and stressing this in all different ways. And one way is through the media and the schools. I showed you how the Anti-Defamation League, the Southern Poverty Law Center, the NAACP are part of the socialist movement. You get people slowly involved. You have to slowly detach people from their existing beliefs, a culture. If you have a ship or a boat at dock, you have the rope from the boat and it's tied to, I forget what they call it. The boat is anchored to the dock through a rope or a chain so it doesn't drift away. So to get that boat out of the dock, off the dock, out of the harbor into another city, first thing you have to do is to detach the rope or the chain holding the boat in place. You have to first do that, and then the boat slowly moves away, and over a period of times the boat gets from point A to B, from B to C, all the way down to the end. That's how the communists work, socially, culturally, politically, economically. The communists stress everything is a process. So just as a boat could get from New York to Australia, it's a process. You have to first unhinge, unattach, disattach the boat from the dock. That's the beginning of the process. The end result is when you dock it where your end point is. So the communists detach people from what we know and believe. We don't praise and support and trust and love the founding fathers. You don't trust and praise your parents. You don't trust and praise your religious leader. It's a process. So they detach you from what has been normal in our society, and then they slowly pull you away from that until now you have transgender teachers. We have transgender professors in our universities. There was one I saw on TV the other day, a transgender, a lesbian, a woman who thinks she's a man. And this is a professor screwing up our kids. This professor, a woman thinking she's a man, and she publicly stated she had plenty of girlfriends who had penises. Now that person, decades ago, would be in a psychiatric ward. Today it's a professor screwing up our children. We have people like that support that in Congress, the Senate, and maybe a couple of people like that on the Supreme Court. 20 years ago, you didn't have this. You see how the process went from where we were? So you had the civil rights movement that wanted equality, voting, freedom, everything the blacks should have had. These groups start out pushing that. But they gain more influence and control of the blacks and Hispanics. But then they pull them away like a ship coming out of dock, going in the ocean and traveling elsewhere to the end result. The Anti-Defamation League, the NAACP, Southern Poverty Law Center, American Civil Liberties Union. At its inception, a lot of these groups seemed to be legitimate, valid, and necessary. But the more they gain influence, the more they move the whole society to the left. They move the politics to the left. They move education to the left. They move the culture, the social fabric, the economics, everything to the left. Again, yesterday's left is today's center. Today's left will be tomorrow's center. It's the process. You see all the parts of the puzzle here. All these 1,000 pieces of a puzzle. When I give you one piece, another piece, I show you how this piece is connected to this piece. When you start seeing the pieces put down in front of you, like as I try to do here, and you get enough of those pieces, sometimes you don't need half the puzzle. Once you get enough, you could pretty much picture what the statement is or what the picture is supposed to be. At some point, you get enough understanding. You get enough of the pieces of the puzzle together. You could see what I'm getting at. And now, when Lee started the show, we started the show here, Lee played you that, and you saw it's not just me. It's 1,000 demonstrations across the country here, and this is probably worldwide. Again, it's a world communist movement. It had always been controlled by the Soviets. Now Red China's involved. When the communists started sending drugs to us, we had a defector in 1968 or 69, doesn't matter. One of the highest rankings, one of the most important Soviet defectors ever, General Jan Shena. I always pronounce his name Sejna because phonetically it would be Sejna, S-E-J-N-A. He defected. He came to America. He was one of the highest-ranking Soviet defectors. He knew all about the Soviet operations because he saw all the papers for it. When he defected, he brought a lot of documents with him, but he had a vast array and a photographic memory, a vast array of knowledge. U.S. intelligence ignored him. They didn't pay attention to him. In fact, they gave him a paper and had him draw the insignia for the Czechoslovak Communist Party. You could find that anywhere. Why have an important defector and you don't utilize his knowledge? Anyway, decades later, a friend of mine, Joe Douglas was a very good anti-communist, one of the most brilliant people I ever met, a real decent guy, the kind of guy that would say prayers, before dinner. Really good guy, expert on the Soviet Union, Soviet nuclear strategy. He was a really good guy, Joe Douglas. So he debriefed, he interviewed the Soviet defector, and from that came the book Red Cocaine. Now, that's about how the Soviets were going to hurt us, destroy us through drugs and narcotics. But the proceeds, the money that the communists get, the Soviets get for the drugs or narcotics, so they're killing us with drugs, but they're making money at the same time they're killing us, and then that money is used to fund the revolution here. So when you hear about Act Blue, and you hear about all this strange money coming in from unknown places to support the Democrats, now money's fungible, but the communists raise money at the same time they're killing us. So we're paying for our destruction, basically. We have people in America that get addicted, and they buy the drugs. The guy at the bottom selling the drugs in the street, the criminal involved in distributing the drugs, but the money at the top, the Soviets, the communists set this up. Red China is heavily involved now the past couple of decades. That money then comes back to, and it funds the revolution. Now, part of the revolution, when the communists write, they're going to work in the electoral arena. That means the revolution is not just protesting in the street, it's not just rioting, it's elections. So some of that funny money is probably drug money coming back to fund elections to get Democrats elected. And now there's more proof of funny money coming here. There's more proof of stolen elections. There's more proof of rigged machines, fake ballots. There's more proof of that. One state had 300,000 ballots that are questionable. This one place had tens of thousands of dead, 30,000 in one area, dead people still on the voting rolls. When the communists say they're going to work in the electoral arena, when the communists write that anything and everything they do that brings the collapse of Western society, anything and everything they do is moral, just, valid, that means they're willing to cheat in elections. Look, if they're willing to kill our children with drugs, if they're willing to promote all kind of sexual perversion on the children, if they're willing to open our borders, if they're willing to flood us and the world with COVID, if they're willing to kill up to 150 million people, the communists did, you don't think they'll cheat in elections? Cheating in elections is a lot easier to do morally. I mean, a lot of people may not willingly kill somebody, but stealing an election, if you're a Democrat now, and the Democrats are swimming in money, now you're finding out, 10 billion here corruption, 5 billion there corruption. What's the big deal? 3 million here, this one office, this one empty office building here, $40 million, all of this corruption. The Democrat Party, there's probably Republicans mixed in there too. The corruption now, the economic corruption looks so big, so devastating. And now that Trump and Doge, they're trying to find this money out and expose it and stop it, the Democrats now are getting more fanatical. You could see they're cheering for Trump to be killed. You see this Congressman Dan Goldman. Dan Goldman had an advertisement in his campaign. He paid a Christian minister, a Hispanic guy with a nice, like a Puerto Rican accent. So Dan Goldman pays this minister in a black suit with the white collar, not like a priest. I don't think he's a Catholic, but anyway, pays this guy to promote Dan Goldman as a congressman, but also to promote the illegal immigration. When you read the communist press, listen, I was at a meeting of communists. It was at a place called the Brecht Forum. The Brecht Forum is now called the Brooklyn Commons. The Brecht Forum in New York had been previously at 451 West Street between Beth and Bethune Streets. That's right along the Hudson River. 451 West Street. I was at an event at the Brecht Forum when a well-known communist who's from the Institute for Policy Studies. So Frances Fox Pivens is a senior fellow at the tax-exempt KGB Front Group Institute for Policy Studies. So she stated at the Brecht Forum, we're going to get the changes we want largely through minorities and immigration. So the communists got basic control of the minorities. So being that they got control of the non-white groups in America, the influence, when I say control, I mean influence. So once they built all these influential groups among the minorities, and then they flood us with 20 million more of those minorities, you could see how the communists plan. They don't think and plan like we do. We have parents, we have couples that get married, they plan for the future, they work to invest, to buy a home, to raise their children. This is when you're doing things right. A lot of people don't do things right, but this is the way it used to be. Parents would do this, try to raise money, save money to get their kids through college. Excuse me, that's long-range planning 40, 50 years ahead of retirement. The communists do that 50, 60, 100 years planning. So I just mentioned the Brecht Forum. At the Brecht Forum, they teach courses. It's now called the Brooklyn Commons. They teach courses on Antonio Gramsci. They teach courses on Karl Marx. The Brecht Forum, which is now the Brooklyn Commons, is very important. So I just brought up the Brecht Forum. I just happen to have in front of me here a publication from CISPAS. CISPAS is a Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador. That's a group supporting the terrorists in El Salvador, the communist terrorists. CISPAS was set up by, I forget the name now. The CISPAS was set up by the brother of the leader of the Communist Party in El Salvador with people from the Cuban mission. So communist agents from the Cuban mission to the UN and a brother of the leader of the Communist Party in El Salvador, they founded CISPAS. CISPAS is a group set up to support the communist revolution in El Salvador. So I have a publication here from CISPAS from 2005. On the front cover is Hugo Chavez. That was the communist dictator involved in drugs and narcotics. He was the dictator of Venezuela. So he's on the front cover. When you open it up, this communist dictator is meeting with Bronx, New York, Bronx Congressman Jose Serrano. So you have a congressman in New York, I believe he's Puerto Rican, and he's meeting with a Latin American guy who's a communist dictator. That's in this publication supporting the communist revolution in El Salvador. So turn a few pages here. The last page, okay, CISPAS 25th anniversary party, and it's a dinner December 3rd at the Brecht Forum. That's the communist place that teaches Gramsci, Golitsyn, teaches the strategies of Gramsci, but also Karl Marx. That's the Brecht Forum. So there's a dinner party, 25th anniversary of this communist group, CISPAS, and it's at the Brecht Forum. After the Brecht Forum, there's an after-party thing. So you have this party and event at the Brecht Forum, and after that, at 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., you go to Winston Unity Hall. Winston Unity Hall is 235 West 23rd Street. This address, Winston Unity Hall, that's the American Communist Party. So in this publication, you have a group CISPAS set up by American communists with communists from El Salvador and communists from the Cuban mission. They set up CISPAS. Inside this, you have a congressman from the Bronx, Jose Serrano, Democrat, obviously, working with this communist dictator from Venezuela. All the same one publication. So in the back page, the last page, you have this communist group supporting the terrorists in El Salvador, and they have a meeting at the Brecht Forum, which is a hotbed of communism. After that, you go to the American Communist Party to have a party. It's the after dinner party. On the same page here, on the bottom, you have New York CISPIS and SEIU 1199. 1199 is the Hospital Workers Union. Now, SEIU is one of the big organizers of this communist rally today all across America. So you have CISPIS, El Salvador communists connected to Cuban communists, connected to American communists. Then you go to, that's CISPIS, then you go to the Brecht Forum, which is all the communists worldwide. Everything has interconnections there. After that, you go to the American Communist Party headquarters to have a celebration. The bottom of this page, they have the Venezuelan flag crossed with the American flag, and you have National Venezuela Solidarity Day. And that's at 310 West 43rd Street. That's the headquarters of the Hospital Workers Union. On the same page, the last page here, you could go meet with the CISPIS. You could go to El Salvador, and there's 4 different things. So you could visit El Salvador and strategize with union organizers, women's organizations, and FMLN, the opposition party, about building strong cross-border resistance. FMLN is a communist terrorist group from El Salvador. So look at this page. You got all these different communist connections on one page. This is put out by CISPIS. Now, CISPIS used to have meetings. A lot of them are open meetings anybody could go to. The FBI used to go to these meetings because they're monitoring groups that support terrorism. So CISPIS, the communist supporting group, brought the FBI to court, and the judge ruled that the FBI could no longer monitor CISPIS. The FBI just sitting and listening would put a chilling effect on dissent. So you see, you can't even monitor the enemy. The enemy is free to organize and strategize. They're free to run campaigns. They're free to collect money. They're free to spend money here, the enemy. They're free to organize groups supporting terrorism in a country, and our national defense is not allowed to even pay attention, not to oppose them or stop them. They're not even allowed to pay attention to them. This is the danger we're in. And this is CISPIS, but this is every country. It's all around the world. Let me get back to the media here. I know I'm jumping around. I'm trying to squeeze here. I see the time is running out. This is a Soviet publication. This is Gorbachev. Under Gorbachev, they took away the image of the enemy to strengthen the communist forces in the capitalist countries. How would you rate that? Total success. When it says here about the media, they talk here about the this is a Soviet publication under Gorbachev. This is 27th Congress, Communist Party, Soviet Union. I'm reading here. They're writing here about the growing role of the mass and propaganda media in promoting the party's economic strategy, its social policy, and in cultivating the socialist consciousness. It regards television, radio, and the press as powerful vehicles of publicity and instruments of public control. We must use the mighty ideological potential of television more effectively and heighten the impact of the entire propaganda and information complex. Its material facilities must be expanded. The more thoughtful and prompt the work of the mass media is, it goes on in that vein. It goes on and on. Look, the communists don't keep secrets. I'm reading this stuff. This is all stuff that's attainable. Now, I've been critiqued by somebody, I think is one of my interviews with Jeff Nyquist. Somebody responded to me something like, what is all this about Jimmy with all this communist literature? That communist literature you could get anywhere. That's what I'm talking about. I emphasize that I know this stuff with mostly freely obtainable material. I'm stressing the fact that this material and information is out there, just that it's being ignored. And then there's a guy complaining, what's the big deal? This information is everywhere. So that guy complaining about me is either incredibly stupid or he's trying to discredit me. I never said that the information I have is secret. Now, some stuff I have is hard to obtain. I have stuff that on it says not for publication. I I have stuff that is secret. It's not intended for the masses. Most of the stuff, or at least a large part of what I have, is all stuff that you could get. The point is that guy was trying to discredit me and maybe weaken the impact of what I'm doing. So as I said, he's either incredibly stupid or he's an enemy trying to weaken any influence I might have. Because this information is available. That's the main complaint I have. The conservative media celebrities missed the whole thing. And now people think this is new. They talk about this new thing about the Marxist Islamist unity. It's over 100 years old. Now, to show you the depths, I'm just going to read you. I did this several times over the past few decades here. I want to read something again because it's so important. This is from a Soviet publication in English. I'm just going to read you what I have underlined here. This is from 1939. Let me see. I think it's from 1939. I'm looking to see if I have the month. It doesn't matter. Okay. This is a communist publication, 1939. This is talking about the Soviet-Nazi partnership. Okay? The Anglo-French Air Forces, despite the big talk of the British about their qualitative superiority of the German Air Forces, are not attempting to undertake any operations against the German front and rear. The Baltic Sea is closed thanks to Soviet-German friendship. In the North Sea, the British fleet cannot resolve to launch any offensive operations. Its hopes of a naval blockade of Germany withered before they had time to blossom. It goes on. The attempts to cut off, remember this, Germany is the Nazis. The attempts to cut off Germany from the USSR, from the Scandinavian countries, and from the Balkans have failed. It goes on talking about the senseless dreams to drive a wedge in Soviet-German friendship somehow or other to bring about a certain delay of events. It goes on and on. Now, the same publication, same date. I'm just going to read you a little bit more here. Talking about the invasion of Poland. Again, this is 1939. So it says here, September 17, 1939 will go down in the history of the Soviet people and the Red Army as a supreme event. On this day, the Red Army troops, in fulfillment of the orders of the High Command, crossed the former Polish frontier. Infantry, cavalry, artillery, tanks, aviation were hurled forward like a mighty avalanche. The Red Army advanced westwards at a pace of unexampled rapidity, which reached as much as 100 kilometers per day, crushing the Polish armed bands on its path. I go down a little further. They're at about, and gangs of Polish officers who intended to stop the victorious advance of the Red Army were wiped off the face of the earth. This is the Soviets bragging about their partnership with Hitler. So the Nazis and Soviets were partners. The documentary, The Soviet Story, shows this. I have it in writing. Now, what I've just read you here, this is a photocopy. I have original copies tucked away in my storage facilities. This stuff, I believe, was called back to be destroyed. The Soviets would not want this document out there. They call back their publications when they have a break from what they did. They usually call it back and destroy it. I got a hold of stuff that they meant to destroy. Sort of like the FBI had documents they wanted destroyed, and they put them in the burn bag, but some maybe loyal FBI agent didn't burn them. And U.S. government now has those documents and the burn bag of the FBI, documenting the proof that they all knew Russian collusion was a hoax. They know that this was one of Obama and the communist operations in America to try to tie Trump to Russia and Putin. So you see here how the communists work. So I hope people get enough understanding here. Let me see what else I have handy.
Well, speaking of that, Jimmy, I want you to hear something. This just came out. This is off of Newsmax. I want to make sure that I've got it up here loud enough. This just hits directly to your point with Obama. This also hits directly to the point that I've told everyone all along. The prosecutions are not going to start in the first year. the prosecutions are really going to start in the second and third year, so as that they carry out all the way to the fourth year, because you can't run for office if you're under indictment. So the great part about all of this is if he does it early enough and all of it is brought out far enough in advance, and this is what I've been telling everybody all along, is that Trump had 4 years to plan his next 4 years. And so Trump is going to use everything he learned in the first 4 years and the second 4 years to plan the last 4 years. So he has the schedule of the prosecution, starting to prosecute people, just to bring them in, just to show, and what you have to do in this prosecution is you have to have enough little fish to lead you and prove that it's the big fish. And so Trump's prosecution is now going to start going after some of those little fish and prosecuting them. And this is what just came out. I just got it a little while ago.
Shake every single American in their shoes. I hate to say this, but President Barack Obama, there is now incontrovertible evidence that he was the spearhead of a seditious conspiracy to subvert the will of the American people and overthrow the United States government back in 2016. We must, absolutely must, hold every one of these criminals accountable for the crimes that they committed. They are the most heinous crimes committed in American history. James Comey, John Brennan, Clapper, Rice, Biden was in the meeting in July 28th in the Oval Office. They briefed Barack Obama on Hillary Clinton's plan to, quote, tie Trump to Russia collusion lies. It consumed our national discourse for 5 years. It undermined a sitting duly elected president. It sabotaged administration. It framed a 3-star general. It destroyed and ripped this country apart. We had a constitutional crisis, the likes of which I don't think any American can fully comprehend. It is atrocious, and every single one of them must be held accountable.
And he's absolutely right that every one of them should be held accountable.
Now, I've been promoting a book. I have no connection to the writer or the book, but Diana West did an excellent expose. It's called The Red Thread, and it's about the Russian collusion hoax. All the major players in the Russian collusion hoax had communist connections, some of them very deep, solid communist connections. You had the head of the FBI admitted he was a communist in college. That's James Comey. I call him James Comey. And John Brennan, head of the CIA, he voted for Gus Hall. And I've been reading you Gus Hall's literature here. So you had the head of the FBI. This is internal security working against America. This is like in your body, you have your immune system. When your immune system goes bad and attacks your body, that's your own immune system attacking your own body. So the very force supposed to protect your body attacks your body. Well, in the body politic, we had our internal defense working against ourselves. You had the FBI and CIA heading a movement to topple MAGA, to stop the communist movement. MAGA was I don't know if MAGA was intentionally stopping the communist movement. MAGA was trying to counter what the Democrats and liberals were doing, maybe not knowing that the liberals and the Democrats were really being pushed and following the policies of the communists. The communists work. They're very, very smart, very sneaky how they work. The problem now is we may have the statute of limitations may be up, but see, this is not only treason. The treason they did caused hundreds of thousands of unarmed, non-combatant civilian Americans. It caused the death of hundreds of thousands of Americans. So these people who did this are not only traitors, they are war criminals. They are war criminals. Now, I called up congressmen and senators and accused them of being war criminals. And now they're saying Trump is a war criminal about Iran. Look, the communists, they know that some of us understand what's going on. Now, if people would get the book, The Red Thread by Diana West. I get no money on this. I never heard of Diana West until a few years ago. When I tell people I never heard of her, they're all surprised. Trevor Loudon, everybody knew about Diana West but me, because I spend most of my time reading the enemy's publications. But I promote her in the book. Now, you could watch Diana West. Look at her interviews about her book, The Red Thread. She speaks excellently. She does excellent research. Trump's people, everybody involved, all the people in the government, people, FBI, CIA, they should read The Red Thread. People have to understand what happened and how the enemy works. There's other books, Red Cocaine by Joe Douglas. If you get everybody in the Drug Enforcement Agency, the FBI, every parent who had a kid die of drugs, everybody worried about the crime from the drugs or the drug cartels, you have to get somebody, may it be put online, Red Cocaine by Joe Douglas. That's based on the testimony of one of the highest-ranking Soviet defectors, General Jan Shaner. Now, there's two versions of the book. The second version is better. It's the same name, Red Cocaine by Joe Douglas, but it's put out by the publisher Edward Harle Publishers, Harle, or something like that. Edward Harle Publishers. The footnotes and the endnotes are chock full of more information other than the first version. So Red Cocaine by Joe Douglas by Edward Harle Publishers, Diana West, The Red Thread. You have Trevor Loudon's books, The Enemy Within, and Barack Obama and the Enemies Within. Trevor Loudon's book, Security Risk Senators. We have documentation, we have proof, and now you got the government itself and people in the American media, I can't believe it, pointing out that this was a conspiracy. Now, I point out the conspiracy, but I also say a conspiracy is usually something quiet and hidden. I'm pointing out the conspiracy is right out in the open. That's how you're successful. You do it right out in the open and people don't see it as a conspiracy. So I say sometimes, and I annoy a lot of conservatives with this, I say if there's a conspiracy, it's the conservative conspiracy covering up the enemy's operations because they missed it. So now the same people that missed it, we have to trust them now to expose it? If they expose it, that's discrediting them. Maybe that's why the conservative media won't really touch this, how deep it goes. I used to call the New York Post every day with information. I offered them. I one time brought a whole box load of information to Steve Dunleavy. This is many years ago. He was a good editorial writer at the New York Post. I brought stuff to Eric Brindell. Eric Brindell was a really good researcher, anti-communist. Eric Brindell did great work. He worked with Herb Romerstein, and I think they jointly put out a book on the Venona intercepts. During the World War II years, the Soviets had so many agents in America, but they were sending secret, Western, what would you call it? There was no computers then.
Western Union or something of that nature.
Yeah, it had to be deciphered, okay? Electronic messages. Some of that stuff wasn't deciphered until decades later. Some of it was deciphered when the Soviets opened up their archives. The Soviets, after they did a fake collapse, to make the fake collapse look real, the Soviets opened up some of their archives, but there were parts of their archives they wouldn't let you see. And they also would not let you take any pictures or take any copies. So some people got in. I know one guy by name, I'm not going to mention now just in case I shouldn't. One guy got in with a new top secret camera that they didn't detect on him, and he was able to photocopy some of the documents. So some of the deciphered electronic messages we didn't decipher them until years later. That came out in a book, I believe, The Venona Intercepts by Eric Brindell and Herb Romerstein. The New York Post had an actual anti-communist active as one of the main editors. Eric Brindell did really great work. Unfortunately, there are not too many people out there now. A lot of the conservative people, even the good ones, denounce what the left is doing to Trump, and they're calling it the McCarthyism. McCarthy was right. The only thing McCarthy had wrong, it was worse than McCarthy was saying. The truth turned out that the communist and Soviet threat was worse than McCarthy and J. Edgar Hoover thought. So J. Edgar Hoover and Joe McCarthy are ridiculed, but in the communist publications I have complaining about J. Edgar Hoover, in their writing they say J. Edgar Hoover arrested tens of thousands of communists. So how could J. Edgar Hoover have been wrong going after communists when the communists themselves say he routed tens of thousands of communists? That meant there was a communist revolution going on. Yeah, so the stuff that's coming out now, Barack Obama, remember his mentor was Frank Marshall Davis. It was Trevor Loudon who brought the name Frank Marshall Davis out. Frank Marshall Davis was such an important, dangerous enemy agent that Frank Marshall Davis was on a very short list in the FBI list to be immediately arrested if we went to war with the Soviet Union. One person who came back from the Soviet Union, I believe it was the 27th Congress, I just read you, I read all the time, the 27th Congress Communist Party, that was under Gorbachev. One woman, Alice Palmer, went to the Soviet Union. I believe she was at this 27th Congress Communist Party Soviet Union, or writing about it. She visited the Soviet Union, and Alice Palmer came back praising the Soviet Union. And then she gave up her seat to Obama. She was instrumental in getting Obama into office. And Obama was supported by the communists. His mentor and advisor was a well-known communist enemy agent. Obama was considered to be a communist. Now, he didn't sound as radical in the beginning because if you're too radical, you expose yourself. So when you're real radical, to be effective, you can't expose your true intent. You have to get in office. When you get in the position to make changes, and Obama spoke out, he pushed the whole idea of blacks are being victimized. He pushed the idea of helping Cuba. The guy was an enemy agent, and now you see, Obama, when he thought the microphone was off, Obama told Putin's top guy, Medvedev, Obama told him after the election, I could tell Putin I could be more what do you call it? More, oh my God, what do they call it? What was the word?
Yeah,
I could be more compromising after the election, something like that. Well, it's funny, Obama never was compromising with the Republicans or conservatives, but he'd be compromising with Putin. And it was Hillary Clinton who transferred a lot of technology to Putin. She built the Silicon Valley for Putin, Skokova University, right outside Moscow. It was under Bill Clinton, the Bernard Schwartz, he was with the space and missile technology or something like space technology, transferred enormous amount of missile technology to communist China. Hillary Clinton transferred technology. She built the Silicon Valley for Putin. Hillary Clinton and Obama sent high-powered assault weapons to the Mexican drug cartels. The trouble we're in is so deep. This is why people can't believe it. It's so big and so bad, and it's all out in the open. And then I seemed like I was the only guy for 42 years. I wasn't, but to me, that's what it looked like. There were other people doing similar work. The thing is, nobody ever heard these people. I made myself heard. I went where people weren't looking for me. I went to talk radio. How else could you reach millions of people who aren't looking for my information? I brought it to them whether they wanted to hear it or not. I brought it to them all different hours of the day and night, weekends, holidays. When I was out in New York, wherever I was, I called the local radio shows. I kept in contact. I was bringing documents and information to the stations. I got in touch. The FBI contacted me a few times. I had a guy contacted the station, and I had the station, believe it or not, who took messages from me. So when they called the station, the guy that answered the phone would take a message from them, and then he'd give it to me, and I'd contact the people. So anyway, I got a call from a guy in Washington, D.C. He brings me down to Washington for a couple of days. He put me in a nice hotel, and he had me talk like I do here, only for hours and hours all day. You wake up, I talk, then I had to eat supper, talk, go to sleep. I did this for a couple of days, and he was taking notes. This guy was a guy who worked in the CIA. He fought in Korea. He fought in Vietnam. No, in Vietnam he was a CIA agent. He told me he has trouble in the CIA because he's anti-communist. When I came back to New York a few days later, I got called in New York by an attorney. He wanted to talk to me. So I went to the attorney's office and I started talking. And I said, look, it's better that you ask me questions. I could keep talking. I could go off in all different tangents. The guy said, no, just keep talking. I'm just keep talking. It's marvelous. I talk. Anyway, the second guy in New York, the guy in New York that brought me in his office, he told me the guy in Washington who referred him to reach me, the guy in Washington, the CIA guy, told the guy in New York that I was the best debriefing he ever did. That was a good compliment to me. So I brought this guy documents, the CIA guy, and I don't know where they ended up, former CIA guy. So I reached a lot of people, but the enemy also knows me. And when you get a threat from the enemy, when they say they're going to kill you, you got to be careful. I mean, I've had car windows broken. I had like six times in 1 year. So that's called a tap on the shoulder. It's a warning. I pretend I don't get it, because if I let them stop me, I'm doing what has to be done. What I'm doing is a lot easier than a guy crawling through a jungle fighting the enemy, or a guy parachuting out of a plane in the desert to fight the enemy. What I'm doing is a lot easier and safer than what they do. So I can't worry about the threat, because what I'm doing has to be done. Sometimes you do things maybe more for your family than for yourself. This is what I'm telling you. Anybody who listens to the work you do, Jeff, Trevor Loudon, anybody who, Johnny Anderson, anybody who listens to the work we do and understand that they got to spread it. They got to spread the message, to listen to these platforms, to these channels, to these stations, to listen to these lectures, to listen to these interviews. You can listen to Diana West on the Red Thread. The whole Trump family, all the people in the Justice Department should read the Red Thread, listen to the interviews, and then discuss it, read it again. You got to get this knowledge permanently tattooed on your brain, especially people involved in the Drug Enforcement Agency. Listen, I had a friend. Listen to this one. Joe Acapinti. That's
Jimmy.
Yeah.
We've been at this for 2 hours. Now we got an option here. You said just a minute ago, you told that guy that he should just ask you questions. And I was going to do a show tonight about MAYDAY and the history of MAYDAY. And that was going to be
history of what?
Of MAYDAY, of what of what these guys are doing, of these events, these protests, the history of it, where it got started, who was involved in it, and so on and so forth. That was going to be my 20-minute broadcast for the night, because I think today is a very important day. So my question is, do you want to be on my show for 20 minutes and talk about MAYDAY and the history of MAYDAY?
I don't know right now. I have to really think. I don't remember anything particular. I know MAYDAY is a worldwide known communist holiday. Right now my mind is, I have to sit and think a while what I could remember about it.
Well, no, I mean, but what can you tell? I mean, you can tell us who's involved, or your history, or what you know of MAYDAY and these events, and how many of them have you been to?
I haven't been to many of the major street things. In the past, I was going to a lot, but this one today is bigger than normal. It was never this big like this, like it's all over the country. This shows you the strength. So since they took away the image of the enemy, and the people with knowledge about communism basically got older and died off, that unleashed the communist movement, which the communists said, take away the image of the enemy to strengthen the socialists, meaning communist forces in the capitalist countries. What you see in today is the proof that we didn't win the Cold War. In fact, General Spaulding the other day said we didn't win the Cold War. So now you're seeing the results. Every time, one of my Soviet publications, they list all the times they did a collapse, all the times they dissolved. Karl Marx dissolved the International Working Man's Association. Karl Marx collapsed his communist movement. Karl Marx did. So they did collapse before it actually was a Soviet Union. And that through the Western intelligence agencies that were monitoring Karl Marx. But the Soviet publication writes, every time they did that, they came back stronger. So this is how the communists work. Right now about May Day, my mind, I can't even right now think of anything important or knowledgeable about it.
Well, you already did. You said this is the biggest one ever.
This particular one, yes, because it's all over the country. And see, a lot of times they do things that are not covered.
Well, I was told they spent $2 billion today.
Well, they have a lot of money. You got that billionaire Singh him, but a lot of the money is coming in from the drug money.
Yeah, well, I couldn't believe all of the organizations that were involved.
Yeah, well, it's this is how the communists work. It's the Communist Party. The Communist Party. Each member goes out. So you have like I used to use the analogy like a bunch of grapes. You have the stem. And then from the stem, there's offshoots. There's a grapes here. One grape is this union, another grape is this union, and then one is this university, all in one grape bunch, but it all goes back to the stem. The stem at the top is the Communist Party. That stem at the top goes to the grapevine. The grapevine goes all the way back, all the bunches of grapes. It's like different countries around the world. And it all goes back to the vine going into the roots, and that's the Soviets at the time. Today, Communist China is portrayed as the leader. But China became communist because of the Soviets. So it's a Soviet-China connection. Now, some people somehow think that you could pull Russia away from China. I don't think that's possible.
I don't either.
Putin today is bringing back the Soviet Union.
They're joined at the hip.
Exactly.
And when you talk about,
they created the illusion. Go ahead.
Ding-a-ling Ping said that the winds of change are blowing, and that we are at a position now that we haven't been in over 100 years, and we need to continue to push this position and take advantage of it. And he said that at a meeting with Putin and Kim Jong-un. And that's when they signed the pact for them to work together with Iran and do all these other things to tie up the United States so as that Russia and China could move on Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, the Baltics, Europe, as well as eventually the United States is their plan.
You know, the years ago, when you had the 60s and 70s, the communist revolution all across the world, they were talking about which way the winds are blowing. They talk about the winds of revolution. That's how they developed the name the Weathermen. They weren't just talking about the revolution, they were building it. So they knew which way the winds were blowing it because they're the ones blowing. They were creating the wind, meaning the revolution. That's why they used the name the Weathermen. And in this publication here, Communist Party USA Report, National Committee, Communist Party, Gus Hall, again, I'm talking about, this is 1998. That's just like 7 or 8 years after supposedly we defeated communism. And it's all about the Communist Party becoming a mass movement, a mass party. It's in writing. So today, now you're seeing it where people could hear me, but now they could pay attention to the news. They're writing here about the AFL-CIO. And when I read here on one of these things recently, The Road to Socialism USA from 2005, I actually mentioned all the groups. I don't have to repeat it. 20 different groups they're working in just in America. Every group, every segment, every region, the communists tailor the movement to the people they're talking to. They tailor it to the neighborhoods they're in. Years ago, the American Communist Party had what they called the language clubs. So in the Polish neighborhood, the Communist Party had a club that was in Polish in New York. They had another one in the German neighborhood in German. They had an Italian one for the Italian neighborhoods. They concentrate on every group. The idea is to build You build a little group here, a little group there, a little group there. You pull it together. It's a mass group then. This is how the communists work. Now you see they're all over America like this. They're all over the world. You got the Communist Party in Russia, and that I read it here on this platform or channel a while back on one of these presentations I do here with you, where the communists were talking about the mass movement and working among the youth. And look what they're doing among the youth now. Now Mendami wants to get kids when they're 2 years old. Could you imagine a creep like that having input in how children, getting them before they're even in school age and preschool? And having transgenders? I don't know how it could have got this bad. See, if Gorbachev didn't do the fake collapse, the communists could not have reached the point they're at now. And now they're at the point where they wrote in the past, they're going to put us to sleep. Eventually, they're going to crush us with the clenched fist. And now you see what I saw on your thing, Jeff, Johnny, and Lee, about what's going on in Europe. The communists are ready to wage war, and the American people don't know this. They don't know that in Europe now the enemy is building and preparing for an attack. Putin is not even hiding that he's a communist, and yet Mike Savage, a conservative, says that Putin is a devout Christian. I mean, the people that built the Institute for Policy Studies, that's a KGB front group in Washington.
Jimmy, with Mike Savage, you got to take a look at the source. He's an idiot.
He is an idiot.
So,
but see, he's an idiot with power. He's an influence. See, when a person,
but
a lot of
still
people are idiots, but an idiot with power and influence, that's dangerous.
Well, it's just like that stupid fucker Tucker.
Oh, yeah. I don't know what happened to Candace Owens. I don't know what happened to these people.
I think Candace is on crack. That girl's got a real problem. She's been hanging out with InfoWars too long. Which he's gone now, thank God. Alex Jones is one of the biggest liars in the history of the world.
It's funny how there are people with the knowledge and they don't get heard, and the people with wrong knowledge, they get heard. They got the big microphone.
Right. I mean, there's so many things that I know about Alex Jones that he lied about, things that I was actually involved in, things where I actually got approval to have Alex Jones come to a military exercise. I got approval to release training doctrine to Alex Jones and InfoWars. I got approval to have him at some of the meetings, the briefings, the AARs, the whole 9 yards. I got it opened up for him. I personally attempted to hand deliver the documents to him numerous times and was rejected. They wouldn't take my calls. I was involved in all of the Jade Helm stuff that he had a conniption about, and it was just all lies. He had all of Texas and half the world in an uproar over his lies completely about the event and what was going on and what we were doing. And I've just been livid with AJ ever since then, because he just lied and lied and lied and lied. And I brought him all of the documents, got him all of the authorizations, everything for him to come in. And he wouldn't do it. He did not want to know the truth if his life depended on it. He wanted to continue to spew his lies, because if he said a word, if he even acknowledged me, it would prove that he had been lying, because I had all the documents, all the training, and the proof is in the pudding. In the end, not a single thing that he said was going to happen happened, which proved that 100% of what he said was a lie.
Well, I'll put, I could not get a job in government, because you go for a normal job the normal way. You have to have a college, university degree at a specific, like political science or something. I don't have that. But see, my credentials are what I've done on the radio. My credentials of what I've accumulated.
And how many years ago, because I was trying to think back how many times I've heard you on the radio. I've even seen you as far as somebody was live on the air on a video and you were talking to them on the phone, like a call-in show. And
I started calling about, it's hard to remember now exactly, but like 42 years.
yeah,
So
I was
I've been
going to say I
interested
was
in long-
listening to you 30 years ago.
Well, I got more. I did more and more as I went along. The more I got into it, the more deeper understanding, and the more deeper I realized the threat. I mean, I was on vacation out west, and I put on the local talk radio, and they were talking about, people call in. They were talking about eating in a restaurant and a moose or something jumped through the window. That was the news. And then I called up talking about the threat from communism. And then after that, the next day, I listened to the radio. Somebody called up talking about Castro. So I brought a different, I woke up some people out there that maybe would listen but never got involved.
Right.
Look, the more people that know what we know, I mean, if people know the threat we're in, like you and I and Jeff and Trevor, if people knew the extent of this, they would get involved. And it's not like something that they think, well, what can I do? Well, if at some point we might be in a shooting war here with each other even, but what we could do is the information has to be gotten out there because elections matter. The communists concentrate on elections, but before the elections or simultaneously, they're changing people's mass thought patterns. I mean, they put this in writing. They're changing mass thought patterns, mass moods, and mass trends. And look at the mass trends now, transgender children. I mean, how much more destructive could they be? I mean, they got to be laughing at us, the KGB. If we ever had a way to do this publicly, I was offering, I like this, the CPAC, Conservative Political Action Committee meetings. I would like all the people, all the conservative leaders, political media, all the big media celebrities, all the conservative political, cultural, all the big conservative named leaders, but instead of them being on the stage, let them sit in the audience. And let me be on the stage with Jeff, Trevor, you, whoever. And we'll be on the stage giving our presentation to the audience, and then let them ask questions. Let them question us. Because to me, the best part when I used to go to public speaking, when I'm hearing somebody speak, to me, I waited to the end. Because to me, question and answer is the most important part. Because I was at lectures where somebody was talking about we defeated communism and stuff, and then at the end, I don't ask a question, I just make a statement. And you'd be surprised the shock of the audience. And then I did that one time, and I got a tap on the shoulder by a guy from England. That turned out to be Chris Story, the guy who published Red Cocaine, the second version. That was the guy that published Anatoly Golitsyn's second book, The Perestroika Deception. He happened to be sitting behind me at a conservative lecture at the Plaza Hotel in New York. So I just happened to meet him because I said something. We didn't win the Cold War. You got it all wrong. And I said what I said. And I got the tap on the shoulder. The guy behind me was a guy with the same idea. He did great work. At the end, he kind of screwed up. He had people, they try to discredit you. So he started following some bad people that kind of discredited him. But Chris Story published Soviet Analyst. He was exposing enemy operations. He published the Red Cocaine, the better version, and he published the Perestroika Deception by Golitsyn. By far the most important Soviet defector ever was Anatoly Golitsyn. Everything Antonio Golitsyn said about the Soviets, I have what he said in Soviet publications. Now, Golitsyn was so smart, he said beforehand, years beforehand, he said the Soviets might even open the Berlin Wall. He knew a major deception was coming. And Golitsyn was the conservatives denounced, even Bill Buckley, the leading conservatives denounced Anatoly Golitsyn. Golitsyn was right. We had a guy in the CIA, the guy in charge of counter-espionage, James Angleton. He was right. I mean, we can look at the history. This is why I say after a fight, it's clear who won. You knocked me out, you won, I lost. You have 10 points in a baseball game, I have 2. Clearly you won. We never look back on who was right and who was wrong. So the people who said we defeated the Soviets, we defeated communism, clearly they were wrong. But they don't pay. they don't get exposed, but the people who were right still aren't being heard. When I said we didn't win the Cold War, now that I'm proven right, people should ask me, how did you know? And I'll say, I know because the enemy was explaining it. And why you ask me now, how did I know? You should have known because I sent you these documents. If we could have a major opening, like a court case, a fair hearing, pro and con, with witnesses, testimony, documentation, if we did it like a fair, open trial, we would win hands down. But we don't get that chance because the communists are going to hide it, and the conservatives hide it because they'd be discredited. So we can't get this out on the major level. This is why I'm so grateful that you take the time, invest all your time and effort to help me and other people get this out. The work you do, like what I do is a little different than Trevor, John, and Jeff. But when you put this all together, I think we kind of have everything covered. Like I defer to you guys about the military stuff, the equipment, but also the actual movement of troops and stuff. And you guys got this down. There's nobody better than you guys. Now, we should be able to advise U.S. intelligence.
Oh, they're getting advised. You can bet your life on that. I mean,
well,
the crazy part about this to me, and I go back in my career a long, long time. I mean, I've worked with people in the FBI, the CIA, the Secret Service. I've worked with basically all of the clandestine and investigative branches for regular crime or espionage type stuff, including the NSA, over my career. And, I think back at how much effort the FBI used to put into tracking Russian agents in the United States. And, every vehicle that came from a embassy that we were watching, at some point in time, that vehicle would go in for maintenance or repair or what have you, and the FBI would install a device on that vehicle so as that the FBI could track the vehicle. And the way they tricked the Russians into not being able to find the devices was the fact that the device wouldn't transmit unless it had received a signal to tell it to. And so and they would build it into a part inside of the car. So like the vehicle's electrical system, it would go into the control box that actually controlled the engine and the transmission. They would make another one that looked identical to it. And they would have their small circuit board get power and everything in it. It was a low wattage transmitter. And what they would do is they would, instead of trying to watch every single road going in and out of Washington, D.C. to see when the Russians would go by or whomever, and each group had their own code, let's say. So the Russians would have one code, another country would have another code, So as these vehicles would pass over a bridge leaving out of Washington, D.C., there would be a low-power transmitter there. The vehicle would pick it up. When the vehicle would pick it up, the vehicle would transmit. And so that way they knew when they needed to start tracking an embassy car that was leaving Washington, D.C., going somewhere. So they're going out for a pickup or a dead drop or whatever they were doing. And so back in the olden days, the FBI and others were deep into monitoring what the Russians were doing. And today they'll give them a ride around town. I mean, it's just totally different from what it was when I was working with the guys, 30 years ago.
Yeah, and now the FBI would go after the Tea Party. They'll go after traditional Catholics who like the Latin Mass. This is like Sun Tzu 2,500 years ago said you got to turn your admirals and generals and spies inward against their own country. Now, a lot of people, I always use analogies. Some people get annoyed, but my analogy with that is this is like your immune system defends your body against infections, viruses, or whatever. When your immune system stops working, you're vulnerable. But worse than that, your immune system not only defends you, when your immune system works against you, like some sort of arthritic or rheumatoid type sickness, when you have the U.S. intelligence working against us instead of for us, look how the danger we're in. And people wouldn't understand that until maybe they read the red thread, because this whole thing was a communist operation against MAGA. So Trump doesn't get everything right. Trump is probably, America is, there's three groups in America. I don't know the proportions, so I can't say the numbers. I'll say there's probably more communists than anti-communists. Now that sounds ridiculous, but anti-communists is a very small group. The majority of Americans are non-communist. That means they're neutral. If you believe we defeated communism, you're not involved, so you're neutral. Now, if I ask a guy, are you communist? He'll say no. I say, what are you doing about communism? He said, nothing. Well, I say, well, then you're not an anti-communist, you're a non-communist. So by my definition, most people, there's more communists than anti-communist. And that's true. But I think the majority are just non-communists, they're neutral. You could have non-communists in the communist movement, like the environmental movement. I mean, just look now at what came out. This is common sense. You have this young girl, Greta Thunberg, or whatever her name is, right? She's an enviro-Leninist. Now she supports radical Islam. She's an enviro-Leninist now supporting the Islamo-Leninist. Then you have gay groups, homo-Leninist, and now they're supporting radical Islam. So you have homo-Leninists supporting Islamo-Leninist, supporting Enviro-Leninist. This is the Popular Front, the All People's Front, the United Front. This is what I've been exposing. This is now the mass movement. This is mass thought patterns being changed. This is yesterday's leftist, today's center. This is the whole spectrum move left. And it could not have done this without Gorbachev taking away the image of the enemy. So Gorbachev put people's minds at ease where they quit studying, and there's no more publications. There's very few publications really opposing the communists. They tried to kill the anti-communist Pope. They killed the head leader of the Birch Society who was working against communism. It's like only one side's fighting, and the side getting beat up doesn't even know they're in a fight. It's like you're sleeping for 30 years, now you wake up and there's communist protest all over America. Like, how did this happen? Oh my God, what happened here? No, this was going on. This is 100 years in the works. You had communists here working around President Lincoln. Colonel Wiedemeyer was a German communist. The reason the communists supported Lincoln wanted to free the slaves. The slaves were laborers that were being unfairly treated. They were slaves. So the communist goal was to get the blacks involved in making a socialist revolution. And then, I don't know, in the early 1900s, the NAACP was formed. A lot of these groups have formed, like the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union. The founder says our goal is communism. So some of these, the American Bar Association used to rate people on their qualifications to be judges and stuff like that. Well, the American Bar Association is totally Marxist now. So they'll endorse one of these communists like Elena Kagan on the Supreme Court. By the way, that guy in Washington, the former CIA guy that had me there, and I talked and talked and talked, he wanted me to check on the background of Elena Kagan. The suspicion was Elena Kagan, that her name was shortened. It may be Kaganovich. Kaganovich was one of the top Soviets that murdered up to 10 million Christians in Ukraine. A top Soviet official, one of the leading guys in causing and killing up to 10 million Ukrainians in the Ukrainian Soviet famine. They listen, people don't understand the depth of this. The Soviets confiscated all the grain. Lenin, in writing, In Lenin's collected works, Lenin called for confiscating the grain and crushing the kulaks with the most ruthless terror. Well, in Ukraine, the communists confiscated all the grain, all the seeds, all the stored and jarred stuff, canned food, seeds, grain, animals, and farm implements, and Christian icons, the crucifix, everything. They confiscated all that. Up to 10 million people starved to death in Ukraine. The Ukrainians know that history just as the Jews know the history of the Holocaust. The Ukrainian famine was covered up. The New York Times covered up the Ukrainian famine at the time. The New York Times had a secret agreement with Stalin. Now, you could find documentation on that. You go on the internet and you look for the Gordon Dispatch or the Clyforth Memorandum. Clyforth, if my memory is correct, is Kleifoth. The Clyforth Memorandum or the Gordon Dispatch. The American ambassador to Russia during the Ukrainian genocide, the American ambassador did an interview with Walter Duranty. Walter Duranty was the Moscow correspondent for the New York Times. So the Moscow correspondent, Duranty, talking to the American ambassador, Duranty told the American ambassador, in agreement with the Soviet authorities and the New York Times, all the reports coming out of the Soviet Union are the opinion of Soviet authorities and not my own. So the New York Times had a secret agreement with Stalin. It covered up the famine genocide in Ukraine. And right after that, President Roosevelt recognized officially the communist dictatorship as being the legitimate government of Russia. So Walter Duranty and the New York Times got a Pulitzer Prize for that. When Walter Duranty says, that's not my opinion, that's the Soviet authorities and Stalin and the New York Times had an agreement. That's in writing. That was found decades ago in the archives of the State Department. I have a copy of it. I made photocopies of it. I brought it to all the media people. Nobody touched it. The New York Times got another Pulitzer Prize on their false reporting on the Russian collusion hoax. So the New York Times got 2 Pulitzer Prizes for basically doing Soviet operations. And the New York Times was investigated over the first one, and the people who investigated recommended to the New York Times and the Pulitzer Prize Committee to take the Pulitzer Prize back from the New York Times. So the New York Times, now people say the New York Times, the once great New York Times. The New York Times supported Stalin, supported Mao, supported Castro. The New York Times was wrong on all the major stories. And yet the New York Times is the paper of record. The New York Times is like a cancer, because that's the paper of record. The communists have been using the New York Times for 100 years. Could you imagine covering up? And the New York Times, I didn't know this too much until Mark Levin brought it out. The New York Times downplayed the Nazi Holocaust. But the New York Times had a secret agreement with Stalin. Now, why would Stalin like and want to cover up the Holocaust? Well, when World War II ended, the fact that the Jews suffered the Nazi Holocaust, that gave more power and sympathy for the Jews to have their own state of Israel. And the Soviets were pushing national liberation worldwide. So founding the state of Israel was their version, I believe, of national liberation for the Jews to have Israel. That would kick the French and the British out of that area. Now, the Muslims didn't like the idea. The Muslims saw it differently. The Muslims saw it like, why do we, I'm saying this is the Muslims' opinion, not mine. They saw it as white people from Europe, blonde hair, red hair people coming into their midst. That's how the Muslims saw it. So then the Soviets quit supporting Israel and turned to support the Muslims. But I forget some of the names, they got mixed up. One of the top Soviet leaders said, we're going to use Arab nationalism to destabilize the Middle East. Remember, the Middle East was controlled by France and Britain. China was controlled pretty much by Britain. So the communists supported the enemy because the idea was to get those countries. First, you have to build nationalism. You have let the country be united against the foreign occupier. So they did that in countries to unite countries against Hitler. But those communist parties after the war stayed strong. So that's how they ended up with Eastern Europe. But the publication in the New York Times covering up the Nazi Holocaust, they gained by it by covering it up, because that gave sympathy for founding the State of Israel. And it was Stalin and the UN who were very strongly supporting the founding of Israel. Now, the Jews, rightfully so, wanted their own state where they don't have to depend on anybody. You have your own state, you defend yourself. That was smart. I agree with that. Then you had Zionists for hundreds of years wanted to have their own state of Israel back. So you have different forces, some of them opposing or competing forces, united to found Israel. And then Israel became the thorn in the side of the Muslim world. That's how the Muslims saw it, and the Soviets played it up. So founding Israel got the French and British out of the area, and Israel was thought, feared to be set up as Israel was set up supposed to be a socialist model for the backward Arabs. But the Arabs didn't view it that way. But the Soviets then switched supporting Israel. They started supporting the Muslims after that. And then you have now Muslim terror against the whole world. And the Soviet-backed Muslims call America enemy number one. No, the big Satan. Israel's the little Satan. So you could see the history here. I'm not a historian on Israel or Zionism. My study is communism, and communism touches everything. I talk about the communist penetration of the Catholic religion. I'm not called anti-Catholic. At least I haven't heard anybody call me that. But if I say the things I say about Israel, people call me anti-Semitic. When the communists or people accuse you of racism or anti-Semitic, and then you're afraid to say things because you don't want to be called racist or anti-Semitic, I call that censorship through ridicule. You can't not talk about the truth. Some truth we don't want to hear, but we have to know. I mean, every country has parts of history that's bad. They talk about slavery in America. Every country had slavery. Every country had warfare. American Indians were killing each other.
There's still lots of countries with slavery.
You have countries now in Africa, and nobody talks about it, that Africa has slavery. They have Christian slaves. Muslim Africans have Christian slaves.
White Christian slaves.
But the left doesn't talk about it because they only talk about slavery if they could use it as a weapon against America. How we suffer now from slavery when slavery is not here. I remember years back, a lot of Christians that I know were talking about slavery in Africa, and they tried to get Jesse Jackson and people like that to denounce it. Finally, eventually they did, but they really didn't want to. Slavery is used as a weapon against us. Everything is weaponized. Everything. Our history, reality, religion, everything is a weapon against us. The communists would do everything and anything. Remember, I read you when that publication from the Communist Party about terrorism. Is it revolutionary? And they wrote there that anything and everything that brings down this system is moral, just, and beautiful, whatever. So this is how the communists work. Look, we're behind the eight ball. We have facts, history all on our side. The problem is we don't have the population on our side because the enemy is way ahead of us in shaping opinion, and they write it. They shape opinions. They change mass thought patterns. They talk about the radicalization process. All the communist publications I have stress the process. To get from A to Z, you have to first to get to B, then from B to C. It's a step-by-step. So the communists working over 100 years in this country, now look what they have. They have people in the Congress, the Senate, the Supreme Court. They control most of the media. What people call the legacy media is more radical now than they were 15 years ago. And you go back further. We had people in the media that were on our side. But if you look up the Institute for Policy Studies, there's a book, I don't want to say it over the air, but I'll talk to you about it later. There had been research on the Institute for Policy Studies. There's actually pictures of KGB agents in the Institute for Policy Studies. Francis Fox Pivens was a senior fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies. She's the one with her husband, the Pivens-Cloward thesis, how to topple America by putting as many people on welfare and government payments as you can. That will collapse us economically. So the communists implement plans to help people in need, but sometimes the communists are doing it for ulterior motives. It's like a pimp helping a 14-year-old runaway girl. What is the pimp's motive? He doesn't care about that girl sleeping in the street. His goal is something else. A pedophile teaching a little boy how to swing a baseball bat or throw a football. The pedophile's goal is something a little further than than throwing the ball, and the pimp's goal is something a little more than getting a 14-year-old girl off the street. That's how communists are. They'll help people with their most immediate needs and desires. That's in writing. But the end result is they got to teach each group they're in that you're never really going to be true, freely, and equal until we have a socialist system. So this is what they've been pushing. And now that they do a fake collapse, the resistance to communism disappeared. That unleashed the full force of the communist apparatus. And now you're seeing the culmination of it. You got people in the Democrat Party who are hoping for Iran to win. You got people among the conservatives who seem like they're supporting Iran over America. And the so-called Trump derangement syndrome, that's covering up what it is. This whole hatred of Trump is precisely because Trump is in the way of the communist movement. If he didn't get into politics, he never had a mass thing against him like this.
Well, he's not only in the way of the communist movement, he's in the way of corruption.
Right, a lot of stuff. Now he doesn't get everything right because he needs to hear us. If he would hear what goes on all your various programs and all the stuff you do. I mean, I listened to the stuff the other night. You, Jeff, and Johnny. I was fascinated. It gave me nightmares, but I was fascinated.
People wonder why I don't sleep at night.
We need sleep. I know. I have no more fingernails. I got bleeding fingers. It's not fair that we know this, and we're trying to turn it around, and we can't get to the people we need to reach. Now that there's people waking up to this Trump collusion, the Russian collusion hoax. I mean, you may not remember it or may not know it, being where you're from, but we had in New York a few decades ago the Tawana Brawley hoax. That made a superstar out of Sharpton. He was involved in a major hoax, and now he's a black leader. If you're running for president, you have to visit Al Sharpton. Al Sharpton was known as a street hustler. According to some of the street thugs I knew, Al Sharpton was buying and selling stolen goods. He was a street hustler. He would buy and sell stolen goods. Now, if somebody robs a house, you get some jewelry, they bring it to a guy like Sharpton. He would pay you, then he brings it somewhere else. That's what they said about him, people in the street that knew him. Now, at some point, he might have gotten really high-level, very expensive jewelry. That's not easy thing to move. You got to then, from that, go to maybe more like a mafia-type person. Well, Sharpton got involved. I don't remember all the details, but some of this stuff was public information. Sharpton got involved. There was some kind of, one of the mafia guys that Sharpton knew or met, they tried to get Sharpton involved in drugs. And I don't know how it got exposed, but Sharpton ended up cooperating with the government against the FBI guy. Now, Sharpton says, well, he had to go, he's not going to get involved in drugs. But he was in the underworld, the very low-level street criminal stuff. But that makes him a snitch. Now, among black people, not all black people, but more of the street crowd, the snitch is the worst thing you could be. Now, the mafia wouldn't do anything against Sharpton. And now that he's a big guy, you can't. You'd be crazy to. I mean, you could shoot at the president. You have less trouble. If somebody tried to shoot Sharpton, I mean, the whole world would riot. But that because Sharpton got in trouble like that. But then he got involved with Tawana Brawley. Now, she was a young black girl. I think she had a stepfather. She had trouble with the stepfather. I don't know if he was violent or sexually abusing her. So I don't know the whole story there. It came out at the time. But a young girl, she was out late, and she was afraid to go home. So she got herself into a black garbage bag, those big garbage bags, the heavy black plastic bags for like heavy construction debris. She put herself in that. She smeared herself with dog feces. She claimed she was raped by black guys and stuff. The whole thing was a hoax. The whole absolute thing was a hoax. She was afraid to go home, so she made up a thing that she was attacked. And some people got accused of it. And anyway, Tawana Brawley, it turned out to be proven a total, absolute, 100% hoax. But instead of discrediting Sharpton, that made him a superstar on the left. The media promoted him, where now he's considered to be a legitimate black leader. That's the Tawana Brawley hoax. Brawley, if I remember it right. Tawana Brawley hoax. It was very well known, at least in New York. So a lot of times, like black people, you'd see KKK on a wall. A lot of times it's written by a black person. You see a swastika on a wall somewhere, that's a hate crime. Somebody burns a hate crime, that's not a hate. I mean, somebody burns an American flag, that's not a hate crime. But with a piece of chalk in a schoolyard, you put a swastika, the police, everybody investigates it. Somebody in the New York City subway with a black magic marker wrote on the wall, "I love Trump," or something like that. Not block letters, just whatever the thickness of the felt tip of the magic marker wrote, "I love Trump," under Mayor de Blasio, the communist. And then the transit authority painted over it or cleaned it off, whatever. And then again, probably the same person in the same spot wrote the same thing again, I love Trump. Or something like that. I love MAGA. I think it was I love Trump. What the mayor did, he had the transit authority working with the police. They put up a plywood wall near that. They cleaned it off, but they put up a plywood wall near that, like they're working behind it. You know what I mean? But they had it set up. They wanted to catch the person who put graffiti on the wall. Could you imagine? There are people pushed into tracks. There are people murdered, people thrown in the tracks, mugged in the subway. And de Blasio was concerned about somebody handwriting, "I love Trump," that they took the time to put up a fake wall so behind it you could have police waiting to catch the person. In front of Trump's hotel in New York, in the street, big letters in the street, right by the big hotel here, in the street, "Black Lives Matter," painted in the street. This is the craziness of the left here, but it serves a purpose. It's part of the movement against Trump. Now, the movement against Trump, it's disguised as a movement against Trump, but it's actually a movement promoting and defending the communist revolution. So instead of making it like a pro-communist thing, they're presenting it as anti-Trump, and Trump is a fascist. Trump is a racist, a fascist. He's a homophobe. He's a womanizer, whatever the other word is. Look, when they target somebody, the communists could destroy anybody. They can make a movement against anybody. Trump was the first one that publicly made a movement it's okay to say Merry Christmas. For a while, we couldn't say Merry Christmas. We would say season's greetings. Little by little, we're being weakened and destroyed, and Trump jumped in. He's like trying to stop the world from turning. That's why the people that support Trump support him strongly. The more you understand the communist movement, the more you support Trump. Now, Trump is not an expert on communism. I don't know if he understood Putin. I don't know. Now, Trump talking about the UN, he's rightfully so mad at the UN, not the UN, the European Union or the NATO. The NATO, European Union, Gorbachev called the new European Soviet. So the Europe is in trouble with that. But when Trump is mad at NATO, NATO got worried, and now they're going to raise their defense spending, and now they look like they may coordinate to help Ukraine.
And Trump
would not have done that.
Trump just ordered Hegseth to pull 5,000 U.S. troops out of Germany before next year.
He did the order. I know he was talking about
No,
it.
I just saw it that Hegseth is doing it.
Well,
Said
that's
Hegseth
wrong.
is calling for the removal of 5,000 troops from Germany by next year.
Well, that's wrong. See, Trump doesn't understand communism, but I was hoping that, because look, NATO is falling asleep. They were totally useless and worthless. And we're spending all this money and they're not. They got frightened enough where they're starting to fund more and worry about the threat from Russia. So I hope Trump changes his mind on that. Look, Trump, like I said, there's very few people who paid attention, very few people who understand communism. Even people who are anti-communist with some understanding maybe don't know it as well as we do, because how many people spend all these years and time we do? Very few people. The people that did are long gone. The people that did died with discredited. So we got to get Trump to turn around. I mean, this whole idea that Putin is not a threat, I mean, wasn't it George Bush that says he looked into Putin's eyes and he saw a Christian or a good soul?
Yeah, that. Well, it just shows you how stupid George was.
Well, that's pretty common, and a lot of it is wishful thinking.
Right.
The idea that we could pull Russia out of China's arms is ridiculous, but that's the common thought. So to the masses of people, I'm the weirdo. I'm the fanatic. I'm the one who's crazy. Now, people tell me I'm crazy. I don't argue. I say I may be crazy, but I'm right. And then I show them documents, and then their mouth is open. They can't believe it. Look, I understand not wanting to know the truth, but it doesn't help you to not know the truth. You want the doctor to be honest with the diagnosis. You don't want a doctor saying, hey, you have a mild cold when you have throat cancer. You need the truth. People don't want to know the truth because sometimes it hurts. But when you're talking about the enemy and it's your life or your family's life, I think more people would get involved in this if they didn't think of themselves, if they look at their children or grandchildren. More people would fight back, maybe defending their children or grandchildren than they would themselves.
Well, people need to understand that not only are we fighting communism, we're also fighting Islam in the United States. And if Islam continues the way it's going in the U.S., everybody's grandchildren that's watching this will be Muslim.
That's right. And the Muslim threat, and who opened the doors to this was the communists, the same in Europe. It was the communists that opened the doors to that. I mean, when the American Communist Press talks about every worker in America should have the right to vote, and they don't differentiate between illegal aliens and regular citizens. So the communists have long-range goals. How do you topple a country? You make it ungovernable. So you have prosecutors who don't prosecute. You have judges who don't convict, who don't sentence people. And yet somebody who fights against the communists could go to prison. Look, they went after General Flynn. They threatened him with going after his son. They want to go after Trump's family. But here's a threat people are not really talking about, and they should. What's his name? Raskin, Congressman Jamie Raskin. His father was a leader and founder of that KGB front group, Institute for Policy Studies. Jamie Raskin openly, publicly threatened any foreign country that makes deals or arrangements with Trump. When we win, we're going to go after you. This is what this guy said. That should be illegal, a citizen getting involved in foreign policy. A guy who he is a congressman though, but threatening foreign countries, leaders and foreign countries. At the same time that's going on, Suzanne Rice, who worked for Obama, is threatening any law firm, any lawyer, anybody who helps Trump. So you have anybody helps Trump in our government, in our country, and you have Jamie Raskin threatening any foreign country and leader that helps Trump. Now when they get in power, there's going to be hell to pay.
Well,
when they get in power,
that's Trump is going to work on a plan to make sure that doesn't happen. Trump.
That's right.
Trump is working on that plan now. Somebody said in the chat earlier, they wonder what rocked Dan Bongino to the core. I know what rocked Dan Bongino to the core. He found out exactly what the government was doing. He found out about the Clintons. He found out about the FBI director. He found out all the dirt on all the stuff. And for someone who has been a professional law enforcement officer in New York City and a Secret Service agent, and, you know, was all about, you know, honor, service, courage, all that other good shit, for him to see what the leadership at the FBI, the NSA, the CIA, and all these other government agencies did to tear down Trump and the illegal shit that they did, yeah, it rocked him to his core. I witnessed it myself when I used to work with Steve Burmeister and Fred Whitehurst at the FBI in downtown at J. Edgar Hoover building. So I've seen it. I know exactly what rocked him to the core. I've been in the same fucking building that rocked him, and been rocked in the same building.
Well, Bongino was interviewed the other day on Sean Hannity's cable show, and I criticize Hannity a lot, but Hannity interviewed Bongino, and he asked Bongino about the burn bag, the paper bag that you put documents in you want to destroy, and Hannity asked him. Well, anyway, Bongino said he's worried. I think he said worried. He may have said scared. I'm not sure if he said scared. Same meaning. But Bongino was very careful how he talked, and he said the problem is a lot worse, a lot deeper than people know, and we have the proof. And then I don't know if Hannity brought up the burn bag, and I think Hannity asked him, do you think it was maybe a loyal FBI agent who purposely had that bag where nothing was burnt? And I think the conclusion was, I think Bongino, he kind of agreed it might have been like a patriotic guy who...
It was several of them, not just one guy.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's it. He said we still have a lot of good people in the FBI.
Yeah.
Bongino was very careful how he was talked. You could see how he was extremely careful and guarded how he talked. You could see he was dying to say things, but because you can't say things, or there's current trials you can't speak about, of coming trials, but he kind of insinuated at least that there's more to come. We have documentation. But
you wouldn't believe how much more there is to come. You won't believe it. People will not believe it. They have the black and white documents that show everything that was going on in the 1.9 million documents that have been uncovered thus far. They've got it all.
Well, the population, people hearing me now, people hearing me before, you could get a primer on this. You could get the book, The Red Thread, look at the interviews with Diana West. Because some people look at things, follow the money. Follow the money, you could find a lot of trails, a lot of connections, but follow the money is one way. Another thing is follow the ideology, follow the communist. The book, The Red Thread, shows you the red thread connecting all the people in the Russian collusion hoax. They have a common thing, is they're all connected. The red thread. I used to talk about all the communist parts of the movement. I say it's like beads on a necklace. Each bead is separate, but they're all connected on the necklace. So her book title was The Red Thread. She was showing you the red, the communist thread that connects all these people in the Russian collusion hoax. I mean, this is major stuff, and the idea that these people knew, many of them, maybe not all of them, many of them knew beforehand it was all a hoax. Those people, it's more than perjury, because those people, what they did, the result of what they did cost hundreds of thousands of American deaths. So treason that caused mass death, that's treason, that's also a war crime. So the war is not bombs and bullets. The war was the virus, the war was the election stealing, the fraudulent votes, opened the borders, fentanyl, heroin, hundreds of thousands of Americans died. That's a war crime. Now, technically, we weren't in a declared war. Now, some of the people saying Trump going into Iran, there was no declaration of war. There was a declaration of war. The Democrats declared war against America. Not officially a declaration of war, but from what their actions and what their statements, they declared war against America. So there was a declaration of war. Now, if you or I were president or anywhere near the top, how could you have a meeting with people to get the Congress, who's anti-American, to declare war against a country they support? You couldn't do it. When Reagan tried to support the Contras, and he had meetings, he didn't bring all the people together because some of the people on the Intelligence Committee were on the enemy side. And when the media complained that Trump didn't let the media go when the troops went into, was it Panama? I get mixed up now. They said during World War II, the media was able to go everywhere. And Reagan told the media, well, in World War II, the media was on our side. So Reagan knew the media was not on our side. Reagan understood communism. He knew what the peace of coexistence was no good. It was only at the end when Reagan started slipping badly with Alzheimer's, that's when everything fell apart. And there was enormous amount of pressure on Reagan to embrace Gorbachev. I don't blame Reagan for that. But at the end, it all fell apart. Reagan was probably the most knowledgeable on communism than any president. President Harding did a good job. Very few people know it. President Harding rounded up the communists, sent them back to Russia, the ones from Russia. President Harding prevented a communist revolution that gained a lot of strength in the early days. And he's more known for a scandal, the Teapot Dome scandal, where they sold somebody in government sold some of our emergency oil stockpile. I don't remember all the details, but Harding understood communism good. And J. Edgar Hoover in his mid-20s was helping, or mid to late his age, like mid to late 20s in age. J. Edgar Hoover was in charge of rounding up foreign communists and sending them back to Russia. So J. Edgar Hoover had an early start in his knowledge about communism. He spent his whole life fighting communism. He devoted his life to it. He had a woman he loved. He proposed to her a couple of times. She kept rejecting him. And because he wasn't married, the communists, to discredit him, said he used to wear women's clothes. He was a homosexual. The communists don't fight fair. They don't fight clean. They fight to win. Anything and everything the communists do is moral and just, as long as it helps the cause of communism. Dan Bongino's a brave guy. I saw him. He had nervousness and fear on his face. And this is why the more the enemy gets threatened, the more vicious they get. When you hear these people, they had a survey in the street. I saw it on Fox Cable, I think it was, randomly stopping people in the street, asking them about the attempt to kill the president. Would you be happy if he died, or stuff like that? And most of the people interviewed didn't want to talk, or they agreed with it. So public sentiment is so far to the left because it was ignored. The analogy I use, Lee, is you're a good, devout Christian man, I think. I know you're a very devout pro-American like me. If you and I grew up in Iran, we could be terrorists too now. People
Absolutely.
don't understand that. People don't understand that. You grow up according to what your surrounding is. If you swim in polluted waters, you could get sick. If you don't smoke, but you're in a room every day, smoke-filled clouds, you could end up with lung cancer. You're influenced by your surroundings. This is why the communist Antonio Gramsci specifically talks about the culture. You defeat or change a country through its culture, through its media. That's how you change what people think and feel. That's how you reach and change mass thought patterns. You do that, you change how people vote. That's how communists now could get elected. In New York, we got a guy, this guy Hassan Piker is calling for blood to flow in American streets. He's openly calling for like mass murder, and he gets to visit the mayor. Hanoi Jane supported Mandami. Hanoi Jane supported the communists during the Vietnam War. You can't have anybody openly supporting Nazis without a big crowd coming against them. With communists, it's just ho-hum. It's no big deal. And people with Trump hats get attacked. To me, if somebody attacks somebody because they're wearing a Trump hat, that's a hate crime. But nobody cares about a Trump supporter, a guy supporting America. But you put a swastika or KKK, everybody's in an uprising. Rightfully so, but why not from my side? Why is there no protection for my side? For our side, I should say.
They don't want us to have any protection. The government's not here to help. At least not the Democratic side of it.
I tried to reach. Let me make one last point.
All right.
At the Trump rallies, all the beautiful rallies Trump had, they were as big as going to a big rock concert. They were that big. I tried to get people involved. At those Trump rallies, they should have burnt the communist flag. I mean, burning the communist flag, the hammer and sickle, that would have been a big signal to our side. And you could burn the flag. Now, some people would say you have a fire. I said, look, you get a 3 feet by 5 feet of a flag like that. You have one person, two people with buckets of water or fire extinguishers and a first aid kit. This way, there's no way it's a hazard in the crowd to make a fire. See, the communists could burn the American flag. There's absolutely no trouble. We should be burning the communist flag all over the place. Our sites, there's things we could do, but I have no way to influence people like that. Now, I would like to have reached the Proud Boys. The Proud Boys were willing to go out in the street and fight, and they liked to fight. And now they look like they disbanded. 2 of them got convicted. They were attacked, and they fought back. They got sentenced to 8 years. The judge in New York says, I know what happened in Europe in the 30s. I'm not going to allow that to happen here. So the communists attack the Proud Boys, and the Proud Boys fight back. The Proud Boys get arrested, and the judge likened them to the Nazis. What kind of judge is that? He's supposed to make a judgment or sentencing on the case, not what he says happened in Europe in the 30s. So when the enemy gets their people on the courts, how could Trump, when Trump goes through all these court cases against Trump, you have a prosecutor that's anti-Trump, anti-white, anti-American. You have a judge the same way. You have people on the Supreme Court the same way. Anyway, I could go on for hours and hours, but look, I really do thank you for giving me this opportunity. Your people listening, spread the word, get active. You can get out in the street. We got to wake people up. Now, what's going on here with Trump and the possible prosecutions coming, we just hope we have fair and honest juries.
That's going to be a problem, but I think that Trump's got a plan for that too.
Well, I hope so. And all the people around Trump, they see the book Red Cocaine, and they see the red thread. They have to understand the depth of this and the totality of the movement. It is big. It's everywhere. It's all over the place. And some of the people on the left are not the enemy. If they knew what we know, they could be brought to our side. And some of the conservatives who think Putin's the savior, I hope we can reach them too, because both sides have people that are misled.
Yeah.
There's people misled on both sides, all victims of the successful communist subversion and influence operations. Anyway, again, I thank you again and again and again. I thank you. Everybody, I'm on this channel. I'm on Dynamic Independence. I'm on jrnyquist.blog and a few other things, and hopefully I'll get my documents out there. If I get stuff to you, hopefully you can get them to Johnny in Germany, because, the Soviet publications, this is important stuff. The fact that they supported Hitler. You had Bella Abzug Jewish supported Hitler. You had 1/3 of the Jewish vote went to Mendami. And those people then would be called anti-Semitic. The designation of those people is communist. The definition, is communist, not anti-Semitic. If people get this right, we can help straighten it out. And we got the beginning here, a possibility. So again, thank you, and everybody, stay informed. Listen to everything that goes on KLW News, KLW Live. All of that stuff you're doing is really great stuff, and I hope you get more success, more money coming in, more people listening, more subscribers. Anyway, thank everybody. God bless you all. Have a good day, and hug your children.
Thank you,
Be
Jimmy.
armed.
Have a good night,
God
buddy.
bless. Bye-bye. Good night.